So, why hasn't Shonen Jump vs. Capcom happened already? It seems like such an obvious entry in the Capcom vs. series. In short, it's because there's been no opportunity. Shonen Jump licenses out each individual series as a separate IP. So, for example, getting the rights to Dragon Ball does not give you any rights to Naruto. And Bandai Namco has bought most of those up, definitely most of the big ones, while companies like Sega manage to occasionally secure an IP for themselves. So, since Shonen Jump doesn't really need Capcom as a publisher the way Marvel did back then in the arcade days, the only way this would happen is for Bandai Namco to approach Capcom as a developer like Tatsunoko did for what would eventually become Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. And that's really the only likely situation for this versus game to happen. Bandai Namco wants a crossover with Shonen Jump's characters, or at least the ones they can access, and they decide that doing a versus game with Capcom is the best approach. But since Bandai Namco does have the rights for virtually every Shonen Jump series, the game would have a very real possibility to not get delisted in 6 months. So, since this unlikely game isn't completely implausible, what would it look like? Well, okay, it would be cel-shaded. That question basically answers itself. But I mean, how would it take shape? And not just the roster this video is named after, but the gameplay, the game modes, the stages, and such. I'd like to go over all of those before talking about the roster proper. If you're not interested in any of that, use the chapters to jump to the roster. It'll have a too long didn't watch at the beginning for the most important parts between then and now. For starters, there's the gameplay. And my baseline would be Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. The game has definitely become more appreciated over the years, especially with its fairly distinct approach to movement compared to the MVC titles, so I'm confident that using Shonen Jump vs. Capcom as a pseudo-sequel would work out. I also just really like the Mega Crash and Baroque systems. The former lets you break out of combos and reset to neutral, but it costs 2 hype meters, in a game where level 3 hyper combos can actually sometimes be worth it for the damage. And you also can't use it if you're in a knockdown state or being hit by a hyper combo. On the flip side, Baroque lets you reset that character's animation at the cost of their red health. If you do so mid-combo, you'll get a power boost in relation to the red health you're sacrificing. But between only having 2 fighters in this game, the mere existence of Mega Crash, and how the buff ends if your combo ends or you use a hyper combo, it's sometimes just better to tag out and get that red health back. Then again, Baroque also makes it so that both players get next to no hype meter generation when it's active, so you can give up that red health not to do more damage, but to just screw your opponent out of a Mega Crash or Hyper Combo opportunity. It's a lot more involved than something like the X Factor was, and it's probably my favorite unique mechanic in any versus game. That said, I would like to expand upon it slightly, so I would give the Baroque 2 other versions. Baroque is activated by attacking and pressing the partner button at the same time. If you do heavy attack in partner, it would work like it did in TVC. But if you press light attack instead, you would trade off the damage buff for instead getting more hype, while the opponent gets the reduced rate, allowing you to either make up the difference or get ahead of them in terms of meter generation. The red zone in this case would determine how much that generation boost you, and only you get. And if medium is pressed, Baroque would instead make it so that the damage dealt to the opponent recovers some of the red health for your resting fighter, and the amount of red health the active fighter gives up determines how much health is gotten per hit. So now that you know what the basic gameplay would be, let's cover some single player modes real quick. And to rip the band-aid off right away, I would not go with a story mode. Yes, the idealized story mode with every character interacting would be really cool, but in practice, massive crossovers like this rarely tell a story where those dynamics and interactions go any deeper than the pre-fight dialogue, even when there's no creative restraints from the right holders on who gets to say what. I also don't want to risk having to compromise the roster to decide who would be more useful for a story mode, and the less I say about power scaling at this point, the better. So, no, not going that route. Instead, I would actually just go with something like either Smash Ultimate's World of Light, or preferably Soul Calibur 2's Weapon Master mode. Just broad, meaty adventure modes. You could have story bits, like saying there's a general threat the heroes and villains are having to team up with, like in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. You could even have characters like Chi-Chi or the RE4 merchant show up as NPCs. The important thing is just to give people not into the online competitive scene something to do. The other single-player modes would be more standard fighting game affairs with a few twists. Mostly arcade mode. It would see the player gathering the Dragon Balls after they find one, so there are 6 battles. and the ending is that character's wish. However, you only pick one character for arcade mode. Your partner would change every match. This has the fringe benefit of mimicking the journey and discovery of new people in the original Dragon Ball, but the intended reasoning is to get new players using new characters. And it also makes it clear what ending you're going for, so that way if your character of choice whiffs it at the final hit of the boss, you're not screwed out of the ending you did that entire run for. The other single-player modes, Time Attack and Survival, do not have this restriction. You pick both your fighters there. But while Time Attack is exactly what you'd expect, Survival mode would have the addition of challenges for every battle. They're optional, but completing them would let you recover extra health on top of whatever you normally would, rewarding some more risky behavior. And finally, I think it would be nice if there was both a training and practice mode. The former is there to teach the player the basics of the controls and the gameplay, and the latter is the traditional fight against a passive and invincible opponent to perfect your combos kind of mode. So, the too long didn't watch is that this is a 2v2 fighter like Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, complete with the Mega Crash and Baroque system that game had, albeit slightly expanded upon in the latter's case. I'd forego a story mode in favor of something like Weapons Master mode, and the arcade mode would have you only select one character with your partner changing every battle to ensure you know which ending you're getting and to force you to learn other characters. Time Attack is very straightforward, while Survival mode has optional challenges in every battle to recover more health. Online modes will be discussed after the roster. Speaking of which, it's time for the main event. So I took a different approach than most when making this gaggle of fighters. I elected to make a massive roster of over 60 playable characters, just as the devs of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite allegedly did. But then I made a tier list out of them, not on their competitive viability, but on their priority. So the S tier comprises the 36 characters I would ensure get in one way or the other, and then every tier after that are what I would consider progressively less essential but still nice to have characters. However, the big challenge of this video was making a satisfying roster. I know I'm not going to come up with a roster that makes literally everyone happy. I mean, Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, My Hero, and JoJo could all independently support a Capcom Versus title. But I do believe this roster is at least filled with reasonable choices on both sides. And I was able to get at least an okay variety of movesets. Probably would have preferred another grapple or two personally, but this'll do. Also, on top of describing any playstyles for the characters if I have any ideas for them, each character will have 3 types of costumes. There's the default design, an alternate one that references their home series when possible, and a crossover cosplay where they dress up as a character from the opposing company. Now, each costume would have 6 alternate colors, and ideally all 3 would be available by default. Cynically speaking, both Bandai Namco and Capcom would want all of it to be DLC, including the alternate colors. So, let's have idealism and cynicism meet in the middle. The crossover cosplays are DLC, but they come with all of their colors in a single bundle. The alternate costume is unlocked by clearing arcade mode and getting that character's ending, and the player starts with 2 colors of each costume once they get them available, with the other colors being unlocked through Zenny and the in-game shop. I'll go over all 3 costumes, but I won't waste your time on the alternate color palettes unless I have a really clever idea for one. Okay, enough preamble. Let's make Thorgy proud with this one.
Choose your character.
Ryu. Ryu has got to be the most straightforward option we can have. He's the face of fighting games, the Mario of punching people, the Pac-Man of default fighters, the Nomad Brawler, the World Warrior, the Eternal Wanderer.
I got pages of these, I could go on.
A character so iconic that nearly every other fighting game protagonist has to avoid stepping on his traits just to stand out. And he's pretty consistent in how he fights across his appearances. He gets the Hadoukens, the Shoryukens, the Tatsumakis, and the key-infused versions of all of the above for his hyper combos. It's all you'd expect, and he's about as safe of a choice as it gets. I will say I've seen some people suggest that Luke would make a better option to promote Street Fighter 6. I strongly disagree with that. In part, it's because I don't think Street Fighter 6 needs help being promoted, but I really just don't want to undermine Luke's popularity. What do I mean by that? Well, Luke is a very well-received protagonist for Street Fighter 6, and for many, he actually fits right in with the classic-era characters. You want to know how to ruin that popularity and goodwill at Land Speed Records? Have him replace Ryu as the Shoto Street Fighter representative, in the first new Versus game in a long time. Don't believe me? I remember when C. Viper got a lot of flack for being in MVC3 when Mega Man wasn't. Now imagine the salt if she replaced Chun-Li. So yes, going with Ryu. And as for his costumes, his Street Fighter II appearance would be used by default, as that's what most Versus titles do. His alternate costume would be the tracksuit from Street Fighter V. It's simple, but it's not often he dresses up in proper, well-cleaned clothes. Usually he's wearing something dirty and or torn apart. As such, the tracksuit is one of his most distinct costumes, not counting the times where he's just dressing up as other Capcom characters. Speaking of cosplay, his crossover cosplay is the Turtle School Gi from Dragon Ball. To keep it from just being an orange version of Ryu's outfit with a special symbol on the back, it would also come with a holstered power pole, a badge modeled after the 4-star Dragon Ball, and Goku's shoes. Oh, speak of the devil.
Choose your character.
Son Goku. Well, got one obvious character out of the way, let's hit up the other. While Dragon Ball is by no means the first major Shonen Jump series, no other manga from this magazine has had the same ripple effect on entertainment. And the same goes for its main protagonist. Besides, we all know what the box art has to be. Ryu charging a Hadouken as Goku charges the Kamehameha. As for the gameplay, most of his hyper combos would be the Kaioken, as I wouldn't be putting much of an emphasis on his Ki Blast for his basic moveset. He can still have them as a weak projectile attack, but I'd like to keep him in line with the Kung Fu roots of the series when possible. His transformations would not be ignored, but they're not going to be costumes or separate characters. Once per fight, Goku would be able to power up for 30 seconds. Normally, this has him go Super Saiyan, giving him access to the level 3 Super Saiyan Kamehameha and the Spirit Ball. If Goku falls down to half health or lower, he instead goes Super Saiyan Blue. This gives him extra moves for his existing hyper combos, and this can unlock a few additional Ki Blasts. In general, this form will generate hype faster. But should the player wait till they're on death's door, they'll instead enter Ultra Instinct, giving him a boost of defense on top of the power buff to make the most of the last of his health. However, Ultra Instinct Goku gets no red health as a trade-off. Moving on to costumes, Goku would obviously stick to his normal orange robes. And you probably guessed that his crossover cosplay would be Ryu's Gi, which would come with a sandbag strapped to his back as well as no shoes whatsoever, for similar reasons that Ryu gets the power pole. So the million-dollar question becomes, what is his alternate outfit? My vote goes to the formal suit we see later in the series. It's a really underrated costume, and I'm baffled it isn't used more in other games. An acceptable second option would be Farmer Goku, an equally underappreciated design. Just give him something more interesting than his normal outfit being torn asunder.
Choose your character.
Chun-Li. Another member of fighting game Mount Rushmore, gaming's de facto female fighter. And to be honest, the Versus series has done her personality dirty. Mostly MVC3 since that one put such an emphasis on characterization. They got the Marvel writers in for their character banter, and while it resulted in everyone from Marvel being in character, the Capcom side just sort of existed, with not much in the way of witty lines or snappy comebacks, save for the DMC crew and Tronbon of all people. But Chun-Li especially got it the worst, with nothing more than a handful of lines that reference the fact that she's a cop. Meanwhile, her passion for martial arts and her pride as a fighter go completely unaddressed. She didn't just proclaim herself to be the world's strongest woman back in Street Fighter II, she literally put in the legwork first to back it up, and deliberately dresses to show it. Between all of that and Street Fighter V and 6 giving her some extra lighthearted elements and depth, she deserves better than asking if you're ready to fight. Sorry for that little tangent, but since Chun-Li is very cut and dry with how she fights in a Versus game even compared to Ryu, I felt like a diatribe was fair. Since there's not much to discuss fighting-wise with her, allow me to use this instance to explain how this roster was selected. For you see, I wanted to get a good variety of franchises on display, so I decided that only Dragon Ball and Street Fighter would be allowed more than 3 reps in the base roster. However, I also didn't want this to just become Street Fighter vs. Dragon Ball featuring Dante from Devil May Cry. So I took some notes from Tatsunoko and Marvel 3. Ryu and Goku would be the mascots of their franchises, and all other characters would represent a different generation from that series. In Chun-Li's case, she represents Street Fighter II. This influenced her costumes as well. I originally was going to give her her Street Fighter VI costume as the default, and her Legacy Chinese dress as the franchise reference. While I do love her new outfit in Street Fighter VI, and it would be a great contrast to Ryu, it felt counterintuitive to the methodology I just described. So instead, her classic dress is now the default. Her franchise reference costume is now the tracksuit from Alpha. Her crossover outfit is not what you'd expect. Chi-Chi is the obvious choice, but I don't want Street Fighter to be tied to any one series with the costumes. Tenten could work if only for the hairstyle, but I have another Street Fighter character I want to save the Naruto costume for, so I don't want to double dip right away. And as you'll see much later in the video, I do have plans for someone dressing up as yours, so that's not an option here either. So, in the end, I settled on a comparatively obscure choice, Koala from One Piece. I actually wanted to go with Boa at first, but her dresses are a bit too long to complement Chun-Li's fighting style. Koala's dress, which is really more of a slightly elongated blouse, has a lot more room for her legs to move, while being very distinct from anything Chun-Li would normally wear. And it introduces the idea that the costumes are not limited to major characters. Also, that hat is adorable.
Choose your character.
Krillin. While he may be based on his adult incarnation here, Krillin is meant to serve as the representation of OG Dragon Ball. When asking who is Goku's best friend, Krillin is the correct answer. I'd go as far as to say he's probably the most important character to Dragon Ball's identity beyond Goku himself. His introduction coincides with Dragon Ball finding its footing as a series with real staying power. He was the first major character who wasn't meant to mirror Journey of the West. He got a much more serious backstory compared to the OG cast. He gave Goku a much-needed rival and genuine friend, balancing out his character. His death in the Demon King Piccolo arc marked the tonal turning point of OG Dragon Ball into what would eventually become Z. And even after the power scaling left humans in the dust, Krillin still found himself at the center of every major conflict, assuming he wasn't dead. If there is any Z fighter who deserves to be playable, I'd say it's Krillin. That wouldn't mean he's alone, though. The main idea for Krillin is that he would be a team fighter, with different moves summoning out other Z fighters. Tien tags in for a tri-beam attack, different combos and moves having Android 18 make appearances, the works. Think of Captain Ginyu from Fighters, but with the heroes of the series. This is on top of his Destructo Disc, Scattering Bullet, and Solar Flare, so he would have some decent moveset variety, which he kinda needs given he wouldn't have any transformations like Goku does. His costumes were pretty cut and dry. He'd have his normal Turtle School robes, with them getting a yellow recolor as a reference to his monk outfit. He has a lot of outfits to choose from to reference the series, including a formal suit of his own, the Saiyan armor, plain clothes with hair, and that's before any of his outfits for the movies. But personally, I would choose to go with his police uniform, because he has the opposite problem of Chun-Li, where that's the one part of his character that often goes ignored. His crossover cosplay is Mogu from Breath of Fire. Krillin would have a fox mask of the character raised over his head as a cheeky little nod, but I mostly just selected this costume because both of them are really short, and Breath of Fire deserves more representation.
Choose your character.
Jury. Okay, Ryu and Chun-Li are the safe picks, pretty much the only Street Fighter characters guaranteed to be in a versus game. Let's actually start adding some newer characters that were introduced after the 1990s. And when it comes to newer Street Fighter characters, no addition quite compares to Jury. Though, if I can be honest with you, I keep forgetting that she wasn't in Street Fighter 4 until the Super re-release, which is likely why she wasn't in MVC3. Yeah, out of all the mistakes I made on that cut character video, no one commented on that one. While it's possible everyone was too busy being upset that I acknowledged Rufus to be a mediocre character, I find it emblematic of how much she just stands head and shoulders over the other newcomers of that era. And it makes sense. She was an antagonist who wasn't directly connected to a main villain, something the series could always use more of, fits pretty naturally into the existing roster, served as a true villainous rival for Chun-Li, which in turn meant Chun-Li wasn't going to have to be as reliant on avenging her father for future stories, and she had a striking but simple design. It's no coincidence that she's the only veteran in Street Fighter VI's base roster to not be a World Warrior. Now for this game, what I'm most interested in is how she would be exaggerated. The Versus series tends to play up the character abilities, especially from the Capcom side, to make them more distinct and to fit in with the more, well, hyper gameplay. And the Street Fighter roster is where this is the most prevalent. From Ryu's Ultra Hadouken becoming a laser, to Chun-Li getting an AoE fireball, to Alex just bodying kaijus. They are noticeably buff from their canon incarnations. For Juri, I picture her eye being the focus of any new tech exclusive to the Versus series. Given that it already has an emphasis on giving her buffs, I could see it working like Jill Valentine's P30 chest injector, which can give her access to some insane dash moves for outright sinister repositioning. She can also gain a counter hyper combo. Think of something along the lines of Beautiful Joe, where she gets behind the opponent with a glowing eye, taunts them sadistically and/or perversely, and then gives them a spine-shattering kick into the back, which then proceeds to send them into the ground and leave them in a crippled state. Her default costume would be the classic Street Fighter IV costume, and her alternate costume would be the full leather biker suit from Street Fighter V, which gets my vote for her best outfit in the series. Her crossover cosplay is Jolene from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I hear people say pretty regularly that Jolene was the inspiration for Juri's final design, but I couldn't find anything to confirm that. But even if it's just a fan rumor, it's way too perfect of a lineup to not go with.
Choose your character.
Frieza. So, when it came to giving Dragon Ball Z a representative, I knew immediately it'd have to be a villain. I actually went with Perfect Cell initially, but after showing this roster to my friends last year, yes, this video's been in the works for that long, they suggested Frieza would be a better pick. And that's fair. The Frieza saga is a true contender for peak Dragon Ball, definitely peak of Dragon Ball Z. It served as the ending of Piccolo's main arc, well, technically Piccolo Jr.'s, and the start of Vegeta's arc. And it introduced the concept of Super Saiyans to boot. Kinda weird to think of the franchise without that these days. And amidst all that, Frieza was a kind of evil that, ironically, we haven't seen since Demon King Piccolo. For this game, Frieza would be in his final form, with Golden Frieza serving as a short-lived transformation. Unlike Goku's transformations, Frieza can enter his golden form as many times as he wants during the fight, but it'll drain his height meter by staying in the form. Golden Frieza could offer faster projectiles for more zoning and pressure options. In fact, I'd say Frieza should be the proper zoner of Dragon Ball's roster. Just beware the return trip of his Destructo discs. His level 3 hyper combo should be him grappling the opponent telepathically and making them explode. Now, normally it would just send them flying backwards from the explosion, but if the attack would KO them, then it actually eviscerates the fighter. As for his costumes, Frieza proved to be one of the hardest to design for this whole project. His final form is self-explanatory, but Golden Frieza being a transformation removes the costume option, and it demands that whatever is his costume allows for that color scheme to be used while being distinct from the base costume. So Black Frieza's out of the question as well. This leads to the best option for his reference costume being Mecha Frieza, since there's enough there to physically turn gold while being distinct. His crossover cosplay would be quite different from the others. He would dress up as Gore from Star Gladiator, but Frieza would be in his first form so that it would better complement him. You would have to adjust the proportions of his first form so you can keep in line with his final form, but it's no more drastic than, let's say, resizing the Koopalings. And I'd say that this costume is the best option for the most evil Dragon Ball character.
Choose your character.
Rashid. With Street Fighter IV, Juri was easily the choice for the representative, with only C. Viper and Seth offering any competition. But for Street Fighter V, the choice was a little less obvious for me. G was at one point considered to represent the weird characters of the series, and Laura would have added a much-needed grappler to the roster. For the longest time, I was actually going to go with Minot, simply because she's a rare case of a puppet fighter who, well, doesn't make me want to burn things. But in the end, I went with Rashid. His personality has always struck me as a more legitimate Dan Hibiki, as instead of being goofy through arrogance and ineptitude, Rashid is simply that combination of laid-back yet passionate, up until the going gets tough. This, combined with his heroic and selfless nature, allows for a character who can serve as his own comic relief, while still serving as a serious and decisive lead for any given scene. In other words, his personality is very versatile. Given that Rashid is already pretty far on the supernatural side of Street Fighter, I don't think he would need that much exaggeration to fit in. He'd probably have a few moves that result in actual tornadoes and cyclones, but that's about it. If you want to be clever, you could give him Captain Commando's Captain Collider, but make it a twister. You could even rename it to Cyclone Collider if you want. Then again, if a move like that was strong enough to make Captain Commando, an otherwise low-tier character, competitively viable, maybe that'd be a bit too much for Rashid. His costumes were thankfully much easier to decide than Frieza's, in part because he doesn't have that many to choose from. He gets his Street Fighter V getup by default, with his battle outfit from 6 being his franchise reference. And for his crossover cosplay, he gets Baki from Naruto. Being another deep-cut character, Baki is the polar opposite of Rashid in terms of personality, although both are still fairly loyal and selfless. They also both happen to use the same wind-based powers, with Baki's Blades of Wind resulting in one of the most brutal deaths in Part 1. Makes me glad Rashid is a casual vlogger instead of a soldier.
Choose your character.
Beerus. And now moving on to Dragon Ball Super. I knew when I started this project that the rep to this series also had to be a villain. Or maybe Yamcha incorporating baseball into his moveset. Huh, that's actually not a bad idea. If I ever make Dragon Ball vs. Capcom, I need to keep that one in mind. But I decided to pick Beerus to represent Super because, despite my many misgivings of this particular incarnation of Dragon Ball, one thing I really respect about it is that the villains aren't just people looking to rule or destroy the world, giving it a better variety of antagonists compared to Z and especially GT. And the Anubis God of Destruction is the perfect embodiment of that direction. His personality makes me wonder how Beerus would play. Would they just mimic how he played in Fighters, or try to emphasize that he's powerful but not interested in the fight? Would he be a powerful rushdown character to emphasize that sheer combat prowess, or a slow but durable character to show off how he knows he's just on another level? Does he start with most of his moveset locked away because he's not really trying, and only unlocks them as he gets more angry by taking damage? Really, so long as they don't go full One Punch Man with him, he'd be more open to experimentation than most of the Dragon Ball roster if you were interested. Personally though, I'd make him a grappler. It gives a good chance to emphasize his strength in a balanced format by giving him several single-hit attacks that do massive damage via said grapples. But his inevitably slow movement would complement his lazy nature. Or does his lazy nature justify slow movement for a character who's really fast? Works either way. I'd also have him not actually be KO'd when his health hits 0, but instead he either gets bored or gives prop to his opponent and leaves. His costumes were limited in terms of options. You have his Anubis getup by default, duh. But what was there to really reference with his costumes? Looking through all of it, the only thing I could find was his pajamas. I mean, I guess it works and it does fit his character, but it's making me really wish that Kill la Kill was a Shonen Jump franchise right now. As for his crossover outfit, it'd have to be a chef of some kind as a nod to his appetite. And as it just so happens, Capcom has an evil chef in Power Stone, Gourmand. I mean, it's perfect. Who else from Capcom could offer a chef outfit for him?
How dare you! I'm Antoine! I am the king of cuisine!
Okay, we'll go with him instead. But only because it gives Beerus a mustache. So, these are the Dragon Ball and Street Fighter characters I had for the base roster. However, something that unfortunately needs to be considered is pre-order characters. I despise the idea myself, but it is sadly standard. So, using Dragon Ball FighterZ as an example, let's take the optimistic outlook and say that these next two characters are unlockable in the roster, but pre-ordering the game would simply unlock them from the start. If these two characters were to be added, the roster would actually start with 38 characters, not 36. If you're wondering why I'm doing this here and not at the end of the base roster like, let's say, Thorgy usually does, that's because both of these characters are going to continue the trend from Street Fighter and Dragon Ball. And, luckily for me, both of these franchises have easy choices for that. Sakura from Street Fighter and Vegeta from Dragon Ball. Now, Sakura being unlockable pre-order fodder is understandable, if not a bit unfortunate, but how did Vegeta lose a spot to Krillin? Well, from a corporate standpoint, people are going to be more likely to pay for Vegeta than Krillin. Creatively speaking, I just didn't want to overload the base roster with Saiyans. So, having the Super Saiyan, the strongest Earthling, the evil alien, and the apathetic god of nap time struck me as a good representation of Dragon Ball as a whole. Now, Obviously, Vegeta and Sakura would not just be clones of Goku and Ryu, but what would separate them? Simple. How they handle transformations. Vegeta would have multiple transformations like Goku, but his would last for the entire fight once active and get progressively stronger, but having increasing downsides of lower defense and less red health for recovery and combat options. He would start in his base form, then Super Saiyan level 2, with platinum blonde hair to make it easier to distinguish, then Super Saiyan Blue, then finally Ultra Ego. Sakura's transformations, however, are not about granting her a power boost. Remember back in the first Marvel vs. Capcom where Ryu could turn into other Shotos from the series? Well, let's bring that back for Sakura and expand upon it slightly. I mean, she already has Dark Sakura to give her the special moves of Akuma. For Ken, let's say she gets blonde hair, red fire from her fists, and becomes Hot Sakura, with Ken's moves from the Versus series and some of his throws and kicks. And for something creative, she gets a transformation that gives her shades and spiky hair. Think of Bakugo's mother for a style reference. This is Cool Sakura, or Sekio Sakura if you wanted to be a bit more lore accurate, and it would give her the famous Dan kicks and some of Blanca's moves. If you wanted to go a step further, you could also let her copy Guile's Sonic Boom and Flash kicks to really mix her up. Each of these transformations for both characters would take a single hypermeter to access. Costume-wise, it was pretty easy. Vegeta has his Saiyan armor by default, his GT Dad Stash casual clothes for the franchise reference, and his crossover cosplay would be based from Mega Man, except for the helmet, but that's solely because his hair color is integral to fighting against him. For Sakura, there's her schoolgirl attire from Alpha, and her park employee from Street Fighter V is a must. But for her crossover cosplay, I don't know. I need a Shonen Jump character that Sakura can dress up as. The costume needs to fit a tomboy like Sakura, but Sakura's outfits still tend to have that slight feminine element to them. Getting that from an action girl design for a character like Sakura can be a bit difficult, and ideally, it would also be nice for it to give maybe Sakura a new hair color, or at least something that would complement her short hair as it is. But I'm not sure if any outfit perfectly fits Sakura like that. Give me some time on this one. I'm sure I can think of a Shonen Jump costume for Sakura to wear before the video's over.
Choose your character.
Mega Man. This little fighting robot was once the Mario of Capcom. These days, Mega Man's more so the Mr. Game & Watch of Capcom. Yeah, it doesn't help that they're a company where a project really needs someone actively invested to get something going, and it seems like anyone interested in anything besides Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Monster Hunter is either gone or unable to get much more than re-releases done. Although between Super Smash Bros. And Sonic Crossworlds, Mega Man isn't completely forgotten. But if he's just gonna be Capcom's crossover ambassador at this point, let's use this game to give the original Blue Bomber some spotlight. That said, while I would be basing him on his classic-era counterpart, I would specifically be using Mega Man 11 for the basis of his design. Part of this is so that the power and special gears can be incorporated into his moveset, such as giving him a powered-up state, or a super move that leaves the opponent in a slowdown state. Part of it is because it makes him slightly taller, so he's less of a robotic manlet while still being one of the shortest characters in the game. And part of it is because, well, the past few entries went with different incarnations of Mega Man, if he even got in at all. So the classic version is overdue for a Versus title. Speaking of which, between Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Super Smash Bros., I think it's safe to say he'd use the Robot Masters for many of his combos, with things like Beat, Auto, and Rush being his options for hyper combos. You could incorporate some of his new powers for Mega Man 11, but I don't think that's strictly necessary. The power and special gear are far more important as far as I'm concerned. As for his costumes, well, there's certainly no limit to his palette swaps available to him. Now, his alternate costume could be the Rush adapter. In fact, it'd be my go-to. But if you wanted to save that for a hyper combo where he Darkstalker style turns into that and gets a massive, massive mobility and power boost for a short time, and I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting to do that, that sounds fun, then his franchise reference could simply be Rock, aka what Mega Man looked like before becoming Mega Man. But if you really wanted to get creative, you could have Mega Man, as Rock, wearing a Met helmet. By the way, have these things ever been called Me Tools? I swear I remember one Mega Man game I played on the GameCube calling them that, but I can't find anything to confirm that. By the way, his Shonen Jump costume would be the true form of G5 from One Punch Man, because the proportions are too perfect for Mega Man. Izuku Midoriya. I mean, come on. There was no way the Shonen Jump equivalent of a Marvel comic was not gonna get its main character in. As I said, My Hero is one of those Shonen Jump series that could have an entire Capcom versus title to it. But for Deku specifically, his personality is also an appeal to his inclusion, especially when put next to some of the more cynical characters in the roster, as Izuku is widely treated as the real deal in his home series, not because of his powers, but his principles and values throughout the series, barring that Bully Maguire mini-arc, line up with what people expect from a classical hero. Especially those in-universe who hate hero society, like Stain or Lady Nagant. There's just always that emphasis that his quirk is not what makes him a hero. It is, however, what makes him a fighter. And for a versus title like this, Izuku would predominantly use full cowling, shoot style, and black whip in his bread and butter combos. This helps him sidestep the issue of which of his many quirks to use gameplay-wise, especially since he's probably going to be based on the Final War incarnation. And it allows him to recycle some moves from other characters in the Marvel series, most predominantly Spider-Man. But it also doesn't trap him into just being a composite character. In fact, when I think of a core element of his moment-to-moment fighting, it would be deciding when, after knocking someone away, do you use shoot style to fire air bullets, jump in to continue the combo in the air, or use black whip to bring them back to the ground? His other quirks wouldn't have to go ignored, though. You could use the hyper combos to bring those in. In fact, I think this would be the best use for Overdrive, especially since I don't want him bouncing around the arena too often. But if you don't have any reservations about that, you could make it so that some of his hyper combos put him in a power-up state where he makes use of Overdrive and/or Regeneration as power states. Moving on to his costumes, Izuku's hero costume from the Final War would be the default one. Though I suppose it really wouldn't matter, because after you get to the beta costume, they all kind of blend together with just minor differences. His alternate costume has quite a few contenders, including some manga promotional art, the aforementioned Bully Maguire arc suit, or his civilian clothes with the shirt that just says shirt. But I'm gonna be simple and just go with him wearing a leather jacket and jeans. I just think that kind of clothes really fits him. His crossover cosplay would be Mr. Capcom himself, Captain Commando, who kind of looks like a My Hero character the more I think about it.
Choose your character.
Zero. Oh look, it's literally the only Mega Man character who exists. Okay, that's not true, but it can sure feel that way, given Zero seems to be the default choice for a Mega Man representative in a Versus title. And I mean, fair enough, I suppose. He is a fighter whose moveset designs itself. Many of his unlockable moves from the platformers just translate really well into a fighting game. And he's consistently a high-tier character while also being the cool Maverick Hunter from Mega Man in the 90s. So he's gonna have a fan base, competitive or otherwise. And there's really not much of a need to go into his fighting style since it's never really changed. It's not like the X series has gotten any new entries since Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Zero's gonna fight like Zero normally does. Now, when it comes to his default costume, it's gonna be Zero, because what else would you do? But I've been a bit torn on his alternate costume, because on one hand, I like the idea of it being his appearance in the Zero series, but you would need to reproportion that to be in line with classic era Zero, and that always just sounds kind of surreal in my head for some reason. So, what I think I would prefer, albeit a bit more ambitiously, is to make X his franchise reference costume, like it was in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but this time also give him alternate color schemes and unique voice lines. Basically, use his franchise reference costume to make X an Echo Fighter, in lack of a better term. And for his crossover cosplay, he gets Valkyrion the Magma Warrior from classic era Yu-Gi-Oh! That's it. Yeah, short segment, but it's Zero. You know what to expect with him.
Choose your character.
Katsuki Bakugo. The second spot for the My Hero Academia representative had a lot of contenders, with 7 different characters vying for the spot. But in the end, I gotta go with Bakugo. While he's not my favorite Shonen Jump character they've ever published, he does get my vote for one of the most interesting foils to any of their protagonists. The series doesn't shy away from his more toxic traits, namely his temper and ego, but it also shows how his outlook leads to his tenacity and ambition, and why those are, to at least some degree, good traits to have. It goes a long way to humanizing a character that could have easily been a one-dimensional bully, and it allows him to be a driving force for other characters around him in the same way Izuku is. Fitting, given they're meant to be the two halves of All Might. Izuku wants to save people, Bakugo wants to defeat evil. To keep in line with this, Bakugo would have a hyper-aggressive playstyle, always being able to be on the attack. Close-range explosives for melee combat, light machine gun fire or controlled blasts to zone opponents if needed, contact grenades and landmines for setup and mix-ups, to using aerial blasts behind him to redirect himself in any given direction. However you look at it, Lord Explosion Murder is always capable of attacking without rest. However, it would come at the cost of him having one of the lowest health bars in the game, and having next to no way to deal with armored moves beyond getting out of the way. Fitting, given Bakugo isn't exactly known for being defensive. For his default costume, it's his hero suit. Given how consistent it's remained throughout the series, the only real debate is rather if it's going to be in one piece or already torn apart. His alternate costume was a bit harder to decide, as his wardrobe is honestly a lot more boring than Deku's, so the only thing that stood out to me was his old junior high outfit at the very beginning of the series. For his crossover cosplay, I landed on Chris Redfield, mostly because that military aesthetic fits Bakugo like a grenade gauntlet.
Choose your character.
Tronbon. We have Mega Man for the classic series, there's Zero for the X timeline, and for the perpetually unfinished 3D trilogy, the comedic anti-villain Tronbon is its representative. Not surprising, she and Zero are the only Mega Man characters to get their own spin-off games. But Zero got that because he was always meant to be the next Mega Man, and Capcom thought he was too drastic of a departure. Rightfully so, if I have to be honest. Tronbon, on the other hand, was just really popular, and the Servbots gave her a unique opportunity for gameplay mechanics. Naturally, this tends to apply to the Versus series, with a single favored Servbot following Tronbon around and transforming into different forms for different attacks, like King Servbot or Chef Servbot. This could be expanded upon slightly by giving either different Servbots or the favored Servbot their weapons from the games, like the Gatling gun or the bazookas, just to give the little droids a little more prominence. However, Tronbon's most defining aspect has always been her mech. With many early Capcom games of the 3D era having anime inspirations for their animations, her bipedal combat walker's ability to pull out just about anything makes Tronbon the closest Capcom character to operating on Toon logic. It might actually be my favorite thing about her character in these games. That was a long way to say that Tronbon's fine and, aside from a few weapons, doesn't need changing. Her costumes would follow the same logic as Marvel vs. Capcom 3, using the mech by default and her reference costume being the giant Servbot head for the base. The color variations of the Servbot could also give some different expressions. And for her crossover cosplay, she would get a Dragon Ball-esque mech based on the Red Ribbon Army. She'd also dress up as Android 18 as an extra detail, or Commander Violet if you want to be really obscure about it.
Choose your character.
Tanjiro Kamado. And here we have the first series I know nothing about. Tanjiro Kamado is the protagonist of Demon Slayer, and that's about all I know. To be fair, that's probably about all he needs to be in a roster like this. But I don't have much to offer on this one combat-wise, and that's actually part of why I'd like to see him. From my favorite characters in Smash Bros. Being the Fire Emblem and Ice Climbers, two franchises I have next to no experience with, to playing the Naruto fighting games before watching the anime or reading the manga, fighting games have just always been a way to get me interested in characters. Maybe this would be what finally gets me to check out Demon Slayer. I've been meaning to, anyway. I did, however, get some costumes for the guy. Yeah, I did at least some research for this. His demon robes, or whatever he normally wears in the series, would be his default. I know I don't need to explain the default costume to like 90% of these characters, but I like the structure. His franchise reference costume would be his school uniform. It's Shonen Jump, of course there's a school involved. And his crossover cosplay would be V from Devil May Cry. DMC is another series I never got into, mostly because of money and interest going to other things first. But a buddy of mine who's into DMC and actually knows a bit about Demon Slayer liked the idea for this costume, so I'm going with it.
Choose your character.
Leon Scott Kennedy. Hey look, it's the current frontrunner of how has this guy not been in a Versus game yet? Well, he officially lost his spot in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom to Frank West, and presumably lost that spot in MVC3 to Chris Redfield. But it is weird that he keeps missing out on these. He's the face of the two best Resident Evil games, and was most people's favorite part of Resident Evil 6's story mode. At least that was true for the people I knew growing up. I guess RE5 screwed him over in MVC3, and the lackluster budget screwed him over in MVCI. Speaking of MVC3, if you've ever played or looked at the Community Edition, you probably have a good idea for how he would play in this game, him using his weapons from RE4 in his regular gameplay. The big difference I would introduce is using Ashley for the hyper combos. Think of how Maya Fey from Phoenix Wright works, I'm assuming that's how you say her name, but with a few more moves. A level 1 hyper combo has her throw a lantern to make an area deal damage by standing in it. For a level 2 hyper combo, you could have Leon fire the Killer 7 and Ashley fire the Broken Butterfly, sending her backwards. For level 3, Leon could throw a flash grenade to start a combo with all of his weapons, like Chris Redfield does, and then Ashley tosses him a rocket launcher to finish the assault. You know, it's funny after I joke about this with Tanjiro, I actually do need to qualify which costume is Leon's default. I would say we give him his brown coat from RE4 by default, if only because of how popular RE4 is. His franchise reference costume would then have to be the Raccoon City Police Department armor from the original RE2. His crossover cosplay is, and I apologize if I say this wrong, Yusuke Urameshi from Yu Yu Hakusho. There's no hard reason for this, I just thought the costume looked cool, and I thought he'd look cool in it. And I also want to use costumes to get more franchises and characters into the game by some means, you know, in case they miss out on roster spots. If you're curious, Ashley would use her classic design in terms of body and facial structure for the default outfit, but with the addition of the black leggings from the remake. I thought those were a nice addition, they complement her color scheme pretty well. You can give her the Pop Diva outfit for the alternate costume, and the It's Not a Phase outfit from the remake for the crossover cosplay. Failing that, you could also just, you know, have her dress up as someone from Yu Yu Hakusho.
Choose your character.
Nezuko Kamado. Second verse, same as the first. I know slightly more about Nezuko than I do Tanjiro, in that she's apparently his inner peace or something like that, or like she's the only thing keeping him sane, and she has this transformation much later in the series where she becomes the only adult in the room and physically tells everyone to knock it off. I also know that she's precious, and I would put a plushie of her on my shelf if I had endless funny money. But beyond that, she falls into Tanjiro, where I'm more interested in how she would play than having a strong idea. And even their costumes aren't that far apart from each other, her default costume being her Japanese robes, her reference costume being the Academy uniform, and her crossover cosplay would be Roll from Mega Man 8.
Choose your character.
Nemesis. Resident Evil's most iconic monster returns. Funnily enough, him saying stars in this game could actually be referring to the Dragon Balls now. It's also funny to think about how he only got into the Versus series because Gil was too fast for his size when adjusted to the game's speed. But after the remake to Resident Evil 3 downgraded him into a series of set pieces instead of boss encounters, gaming's most iconic stalker, man that sounds awful when said out loud, deserves another round at glory. That said, I wouldn't completely ignore the remake for Nemesis. A new bit of tech could be the ability to switch between his classic bazooka and the flamethrower, or even a machine gun from the live-action movies. This can allow for variations of his level 1 super and his moment-to-moment combat, while not needing to change his cinematic level 3 hyper combo. He could also be given a hyper combo or even just a command grab that lets him use the poison tentacle in his arms to, well, poison his enemy, allowing him to fight just a little more like he does in the games. His costume, however, would ignore the remake. His original design was much more poignant and sleek. I'm not crazy for the garbage bag they threw on him in the remake. His battle damage form would be his alternate franchise reference costume, although for that one, I would include his breathing apparatus the remake gave his first form. It gives him the visuals that he's recovering from a bad encounter, but chose to fight regardless. And for his crossover cosplay, My Hero Academia gives way too perfect of a choice with the Nomus. I would say the black Nomu from Hoshu City because it fits Nemesis proportions almost perfectly, but its alternate colors could reference others, like the Nomu from USJ or the Chainsaw Nomu.
Choose your character.
Monkey D. Luffy. One Piece. Another series I don't have much knowledge of, but unlike Demon Slayer, it wasn't from a lack of trying. I actually read the manga once upon a time. I ended up stopping right after the end of the Skypiea arc. For some longtime fans, that's way too early. I even got laughed at once for saying that. But it was 40 volumes into the story. I love the first 2 arcs, but the suddenness of Skypiea, the fact that it was almost all set up for things that were not going to be paid off for a long time, that it felt like none of the characters had made any progress to their personally established goals in that arc, at least in the then and now, and that people said this is when the series stops being generic and gets good, it gave me the idea that this series was just not for me moving forward. Someday I'll give the manga a second try, but for now, not interested. But even if I was a massive fan, it wouldn't make Luffy any easier to make a moveset for. The dude has over 1,000 named moves because he doesn't really have a single combat style. His main thing is being creative with his rubber powers to take on opponents he otherwise couldn't. There's a reason that One Piece games play like Dynasty Warriors instead of going for the traditional fighting game. As such, for Luffy to work as a fighter, he's gonna need some compromise. Either his durability would have to be below average to account for that infinite range, or his moves would have to be hard to use with accuracy to account for his ability to take punishment. But that's the downside of a crossover. Characters from different franchises, with rule sets that were never meant to interact with each other, need to find a middle ground with some semblance of balance. Thankfully, there's an easy option for his costumes. So you have his signature straw hat pirate attire for his default appearance. However, for many of his hyper combos, I would have him be transforming into his Gear 5 version that I know about, because Crunchyroll would not stop spamming ads for it. So, for his franchise reference costume, just let him stay in Gear 5 for the whole fight. After all, you would already have to do extensive rigging for that costume just to make it work for the hyper combos, may as well take advantage of that. And for his crossover cosplay, Street Fighter's Dulcim just seems right for him, for presumably obvious reasons. Oh, by the way, speaking of obvious...
Choose your character.
Frank West. Part of me would much rather have Chuck Green or Nick Ramos in this slot. Chuck is my favorite character in the Dead Rising series, and Nick is a truly underappreciated character in Capcom's library. I honestly like him more than most of the Resident Evil characters, but I can't deny it. Frank's level up system with his camera earning PP to level himself up is a great and unique mechanic. And after Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster, once again, shortchanged Frank, getting to hear TJR take up the mantle once again would be greatly appreciated. And with everyone on the Shonen Jump side pretty much having to be a new fighter from scratch, having as many characters on the Capcom side as possible be veterans would ideally ease up some of the development. Anyway, from a gameplay standpoint, Frank would continue his trajectory the Marvel games had, but with a buff to his hyper combos. On the small end, the Servbot Smash attack would be buffed when he's at level 3. Frank gangs a shockwave when he jumps, bringing the opponent up in the air with him to secure the grapple. The much bigger buff is giving him back the real Mega Buster, but at a cost. Given that Frank's normal moves are now much better than his TVC counterparts, he shouldn't have access to a special that safe as a level 1 hyper combo. So now it's a level 5 hyper combo. But every time Frank levels up, the Buster takes one less hyper meter to use. So when maxed out at level 5, Frank's Mega Buster is back to its TVC glory days, but it's much more costly otherwise. Frank's default appearance would be based on his Dead Rising 1 counterpart, which is the tradition for him in these crossovers, but I decided to forego the Mega Man armor. Sure, you could give it to him to use for his Mega Buster hyper combo like in Tatsunoko, and then pull a Gear 5 by making it his alternate costume. And honestly, I'd be fine with that, but I'd much rather have it be the Willamette Parkview Mall outfit with the Servbot helmet. Possibly the two most iconic outfits in the franchise. The color palettes could have the Servbot helmet change colors, get different expressions, or even just different helmets, like the bucket or the demon mask. His crossover cosplay would be Saburo Kono. He's a protagonist of a one-shot Shonen Jump manga called Spirit Photographer, and, as the title suggests, he goes around photographing the undead ghosts of Japan. A fantastic choice for a Shonen Jump Frank West costume.
Choose your character.
Nami. So, this character spot was originally going to go to Boa Hancock, but when I showed this roster to one of my friends last year, he made his disappointment clear. He all but outright said, "You're usually not this cliché." And to be fair, he's right. I was literally using previous Shonen Jump crossovers to get an idea of what the normal choices for One Piece are. So, since said friend is a huge One Piece fan, I allowed him to choose who would be the other Straw Hat in the base roster, and told him that if he couldn't think of anyone, I would just go with Nami by default. I was not expecting him to pick Nami over Zoro or Sanji, much less to be as decisive as he was. But she's just as much of an OG Straw Hat as Zoro is, and her combat style is grossly underappreciated, so she got the spot. Speaking of which, that fighting style is something I have a basic understanding of. She's a staff fighter, something the devs of MVC3 really wanted for its entire development, with the ability to control the weather with it. The full extent of what that translates to, however, is beyond my time with the series. I know about the water, lightning, and thundercloud abilities, but I don't know if that translates to her being able to make things like tornadoes, thunderous sound waves, or arctic air. But if the gameplay of this Warriors game is lore accurate, she actually can do all of that. Damn, that yokai she got later in the series really gave her that much of a buff? Anyway, my inexperience with the series aside, for Nami's costumes I did have an interesting idea. Her default costume would be her bikini top and blue jeans, probably her most iconic appearance at this point. But while her color palettes would alternate between the different tops that she's had over time, they're not all that noticeable. So, on top of that, her hair color would change to reference other characters in the series. A dark navy blue for Nico Robin, light blue for Vivi, pink for Rebecca, white for Yamato, stuff like that. I'd also do something similar for a reference outfit. The whole cake arc dress. It's a good contrast to her default costume, and the dress itself could be recolored to reference other ladies in the series, like pink for Koala, yellow for Rebecca, again, or purple for Tashigi. And for her crossover cosplay, I wanted to be a bit clever and opted for Captain Rose from Zack and Wiki, a truly underappreciated game that deserves at least some representation in one of these crossovers. Okay, this is a last-minute addendum. I ran this by that One Piece buddy one last time before finishing the video, and he asked me to give Nami some more costumes, specifically requesting that at least one of them be cover art, since he feels like those go underappreciated. Now, since I can't just give Nami alone the extra costumes, I'm gonna use this as a chance to expand upon and solidify the pre-order bonus. We'll say that Sakura and Vegeta are for sure in the game no matter what, and that pre-ordering the game just unlocks them right away. The exclusive benefits to the pre-order bonus would now be additional franchise reference costumes. In particular, Ryu gets his vacation outfit from Street Fighter IV, Goku his farming outfit, Chun-Li her Street Fighter VI attire, Krillin his casual clothes with hair, Leon his gangster attire, with Ashley dyeing her hair black and dressing as Ada Wong from the remake, Deku gets his shirt that says shirt, Frank gets both his convict attire and his off-the-record wrestling tights, and Nami gets both her Japanese dress and her winter coat with leggings.
Choose your character.
Batsu. Thanks to the second Capcom Fighting Collection, people finally get a chance to play Batsu in his home series, Rival Schools, aka what Street Fighter EX should have been. And thanks to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, we have an idea of how he plays in a Versus title. I really don't have too much to say on him. He might be the most requested character from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom to return in a more readily available title, so I'll just jump to the costumes with him. His default one would be the Academy uniform, his franchise reference would be Burning Batsu, and his crossover cosplay would be Jaden Yuki from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. The Jaden outfit would obviously have yellow, blue, and white colors to reference the series proper, and a black version to reference Chaz during his solo arc, and maybe a purple one to reference Yugi Moto.
Choose your character.
Naruto Uzumaki. Another one of those characters you all knew would be in this game from premise alone. He also marks the last of the Shonen Jump franchises that will get multiple characters in the base roster. But never mind that for now. Naruto would be based on his fourth Great Ninja War incarnation, as it gives him access to most of his toolkit from the series without devolving into whatever Boruto did. Literally, I don't actually know what Boruto did. I have not read nor watched any of it because, frankly, I was happy with how the 7th Hokage and the Scarlet Spring wrapped up the series. As for the aforementioned toolkit, Naruto is definitely unique. His signature Shadow Clone Jutsu would be his defining trait for combos, with some combos having the Shadow Clone supporting him to keep the chain going, while others have him stand back and let the clones punch him to make some distance. They can be launched as projectiles, summoned from the ground to make an enemy airborne, or even spawn from above as a unique anti-air. All of this would result in a fighter who, while not overtly strong, can really pester and disrupt his opponents from nearly any range. Kind of perfect for Naruto given his personality. Naruto's level 1 hyper combo could be the Rasengan, with the light attack being the traditional version, and the heavy attack being a thrown Rasen Shuriken. A step beyond could be letting his Kurama Link be a powered up state, making him fast and strong at the cost of removing his shadow clones. But you also risk making 2 characters in one at that point, which might be a bit too much development-wise. Now, his Shippuden orange and black jumpsuit would be the basis of his normal costume, and at least one of the color swaps needs to be the deep blue version used in the Clash of Ninja games. And I'm not just saying that because I utterly despise how the Storm games made 90% of the alternate color schemes worthless. His alternate reference costume would be his appearance in Naruto the Last. It's the coolest outfit he's ever gotten, though if you also gave him his normal hairstyle, you wouldn't hear me complain. For his crossover cosplay, it would be Ginzo, aka the ninja guy from Captain Commando. Fitting for the anime ninja guy, if you ask me.
Choose your character.
Mike Haggar. I mean, do I even need to explain this one? He's Mike Haggar, an institution of Capcom crossover characters. His inclusion is simply a correct decision. Any choice against him being playable is a deliberate anti-fun decision. He plays like Mike Haggar. His default costume is Mike Haggar. His reference costume is Mike Haggar the Mayor. His crossover cosplay is Toro Sakamoto, as only Mike Haggar could do a cosplay of that man any justice. Because he's Mike Haggar.
Choose your character.
Sasuke Uchiha. Oh, Sasuke. To this day, you are a character I cannot decide if I like or not. I hear Boruto actually did some good for him, so I imagine those who followed the follow-up are happier with him. But an old head like me? Well, whereas Naruto and even Sakura had to go through training to get their abilities, and there's a clear connection between the trainer and the trainee, Sasuke gets gifted the curse mark and can then overpower its creator, and then his Sharingan gets the ability to just give him powers based on how sad or mad he is in a comic panel. Make no mistake, Uchiha eyes were always overpowered in the series, but Sasuke is when they became more of a video game mechanic than a plot device. Then again, he did kill Danzo, so he's not completely irredeemable. Gameplay-wise, Sasuke would have the distinction of being a draw sword fighter, but I would leave that to his melee combat. I would instead like to see a return to form on the emphasis of fire techniques. Yeah, remember when that used to be what the Uchiha clan specialized in? His level 1 hyper combo is Fireball Jutsu when he's on the ground, and it becomes Phoenix Flower Jutsu when in the air. You could also make it so that on the ground he can use Phoenix Flower Jutsu as an anti-air, I suppose. But the reason you would want these moves to land on the ground is because they would leave a trail of fire, which by itself is strictly cosmetic. But with his level 3 hyper combo of Flame Control, he would have them all rise up as pillars of purple flame, allowing him to set up powerful, difficult to dodge moves if he can accumulate the hype before his flames literally die out. Sasuke could also have his various Chidori moves as level 1 hyper combos, with the attack button at the end of the string determining which one he does. Light attack is the Chidori Stream, wide-reaching but weak. Medium is Chidori Blade, having him dash across the screen to hit them, and heavy is Chidori Spear, allowing him to impale them from a distance, but it has to be angled up. So his default costume would be the 4th Great Ninja War outfit, but deciding on a single reference for him was quite the challenge. His outfit in the last isn't all that distinct beyond a unique hairstyle, but his outfit from when he studied under Orochimaru isn't exactly winning me over either, so in the end, his Taka outfit ended up taking the spot. Besides, the Akatsuki cloak is way too iconic and important for the series to leave out if you ask me. For his crossover cosplay, he gets to dress up as Strider, aka that ninja guy from Marvel vs. Capcom that technically has a game of his own. Although admittedly, it's a tad colorful for Sasuke, which actually kind of makes it funny if you ask me. Dante. If copyright didn't suck, this would be a montage of Dante doing Dante things set to pull my devil trigger. But with Dante being another character from MVC3 that made it to MVCI, his playstyle is pretty locked in. I like the idea of him having his weapon switching from the special edition of DMC 3 and 4, but like with Naruto's nine-tailed Link form, it would result in extra movesets for a character that, in all honesty, doesn't need the help. Dante's sword combos, guns galore, and devil trigger mode are more than enough for him. So, since this is another cut-and-dry veteran, let's get to the costumes. I'd actually update him to his DMC5 counterpart. Most of the Versus titles prefer to keep characters to their most iconic form, but between how stylized most of the cast would be, and the fact that DMC5 made sure that Uncle Dante was still Dante, he can be an exception. His alternate costume would be a version of the Diesel Dante from Devil May Cry 2. I say a version of because you can't really go one-to-one since Diesel is an actual company, and they would need to renew the cross-promotion. All that matters is that Dante looks like he walked out of a Goodwill for the franchise reference costume. Now, as far as crossovers we actually can work with, his cosplay outfit would be, and I apologize if I get this wrong, Inosuke from Demon Slayer. It would actually double as a reference to Shirtless Dante from the DMC series, and Inosuke's boar head could be used for the devil trigger mode of this costume via a helmet or mask.
Choose your character.
Toby. Naruto is my favorite Shonen Jump manga, but I actually went back and forth on whether it, One Piece, or My Hero would get the third character slot. In the end, Naruto only won out because I like what the third character can contribute. You see, Toby's personality is that of a determined nihilist who believes that escaping into a dream would be better than confronting reality. It not only makes him a good anti-Naruto, but it offers strong interaction potential for both sides of the roster. Oh, and if you're curious about why I'm referring to him as Toby, I have a buddy on Discord who's considering going through the series, and it would be a pretty big deal to explain who he really is. As for his gameplay, if Naruto is sticking to his signature moves and Sasuke is returned to form, Toby is the power of endgame. Obviously, there's his War Fan and his absurd capabilities with Fireball Jutsu, but what I'm most interested in is his Mangekyo. Being a close-up move, his ability to teleport someone or himself sounds like the perfect kind of toxic for a 2D fighter, though you'd probably have to make it a level 1 hyper combo to avoid it being spammed. Taking a note from Doctor Strange, he could teleport away a projectile using the Mangekyo Sharingan, and then retaliate with a Fireball Jutsu, and then have that projectile stored as a mix-up option. So, his fourth Great Ninja War appearance is his default version. Toby's attire as the Masked Man would be his franchise reference. I considered him as Akatsuki Toby, but I don't want to mix him up with Sasuke by accident. For his crossover cosplay, I went with a more obscure Street Fighter choice, Q. Mostly because his mysterious shtick works really well with Toby. If anything, it would conceal his identity better than his canonical disguise did, at least for some people. Plus, Q is cool.
Choose your character.
Nero. Okay, so this is another character I don't have too much to say on, but that's because Nero might be the most requested newcomer to the Versus series I've seen. Most people agree that Devil May Cry 5 really brought him into his own. Most agree that his mechanical arms would really let him mix up his moveset, while not requiring a full new playstyle like, let's say, Dante's alternate weapons might. Most would agree that he should look like he did in Devil May Cry 5, with his EX costume being his alternate costume. If you've seen any Capcom Versus roster makers since Devil May Cry 5 came out, you've already heard all of this before. The only thing I can really offer specific to this video is his Shonen Jump crossover cosplay, which, by the way, would be Buccaneer from Fullmetal Alchemist. Nero deserves the hype he's getting, I don't want to undermine that. It's just that this video is already a long one, and I don't have much to add to the conversation on this guy. So I'll just agree with the common consensus so we can get a move on.
Choose your character.
Ichigo. This guy is easily the character I have the least interest in on this roster. I don't know what it is about Bleach, but it's just never grabbed me. I never even had that element of, I should really check this out like I did with Demon Slayer, or, I really need to give this a proper chance like I do with a One Piece revisit. But even I can admit that Bleach deserves a representative. However, it wasn't going to be Ichigo originally. I actually considered Rukia for the roster as a mix-up. However, Ichigo has a unique opportunity with him. You see, Soki from Onimusha was in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, and Ichigo has the ability to lift his general playstyle. It wouldn't be one-to-one, obviously, especially if you want Ichigo to be as lore accurate as possible, but the framework should be able to carry over. Ichigo can use some of those basic combos and mix them up with his own moves from his home series for a little bit more mobility, fixing what was considered Soki's biggest issue when trying to add him to MVC3. I can also imagine him turning into his hollow form and absorbing Reshi when he attacks opponents for his best hyper combo, similar to Soki's transformation mechanic. I'm not sure if this would be the most lore-accurate take, because again, not a fan of the franchise, but it would work for this game's purposes. Getting to his costumes, his default attire would be his black robes. His alternate costume would simply be his casual clothes. What exactly that entails, I'll leave up to your imagination, since he's had several civilian outfits throughout the manga. Even a rudimentary Google search can tell me that much. And as for his crossover cosplay, gee, I wonder who I'd go with.
Choose your character.
Asura. And it is at this point that you all understand why Akuma is not in the roster. Asura legitimately feels like a Shonen Jump character. A man who, through sheer anger and love for his daughter, crawled his way out of hell to enact revenge on those who wronged him, save his daughter, and save his homeworld. A demigod and a master of hand-to-hand combat, he is a force beyond nature, who fights to the bitter end and will return for a second round if needed. He's up there with Nero as one of the most requested additions to the series. Gameplay-wise, Asura does not use projectiles. Through super armor and sheer grit, he powers through moves to get close to the enemies and pound them in the paste. He also has a healing factor, allowing him to recover red health over time, even when on the field. This does, however, make it harder for him to use the breakout and power-up mechanics as easily as other characters. Altogether, this makes Asura the tank of the game. A powerhouse with very, very limited range who needs to make the most of every hit he can land. Something that can be amplified with his 6-arm form, either being in his hyper combos or allowing for his attacks to land multiple times per hit via a transformation. His costume would normally be his angry form, also known as the post-resurrection form, and his alternate costume would be him dressed up as Akuma in reference to the DLC his game got. His crossover cosplay would be Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star. I imagine the two would have a similar gameplay style in a versus game, so it's fitting.
Choose your character.
Tatsumaki. So, when I said that Rukia was meant to take the spot of Ichigo, it's because she was meant to mark the beginning of the trio of characters who would represent a series that they were important to, but not the mascots or main characters of, in an effort to get more unique characters in the roster. As you've probably noticed by now, the Shonen Jump side of the roster is almost exclusively the action leads, their foils or friends, and the occasional villain. That'll happen when you only get 2 characters per series. But for One Punch Man, not only is thinking outside the box desirable, it's damn near mandatory given the deliberately broken nature of its titular character. Hence, Tatsumaki ends up being the representative of the series. Her moveset would comprise of physics-based attacks, manipulating the ground around her, and being able to literally crush her opponents through psychic force. She can be given some elements of Magneto's combat style, with a special shout-out to his ability to pull enemies towards him. Summoning multiple pillars from the ground can be a level 1 hyper combo, spinning debris around her for another, and her ultimate move from the One Punch Man fighting game would be a great option for a level 3 hyper combo. She's hardly the first person in a fighting game to drop a building on someone, but having the attack deal multiple hits as the building slowly collapses on them is a nice touch that sells the scale of the move. Her hero clothes would be the default costume, although I would specifically request that she gets a green outfit with dark green hair as a reference to her sister. A pink version of her outfit with brown hair could be a reference to Ochako Uraraka from My Hero Academia, and you could give her a red costume with red hair as a nod to Nagato from Naruto. Her franchise reference costume would be her pajamas because they're absolutely adorable, and also the only option I could think of. And for her crossover cosplay, I'm going with Anita from Darkstalkers, aka the little girl that Donovan protects. Oh, And speaking of Darkstalkers,
Choose your character.
Felicia. Huh, a werecat, huh? That's a monster you don't see too often. Actually, Felicia's the only mainstream example I can think of this in pop culture, unless the Thundercats count. Anyway, she's the closest thing to a traditional hero in the world of Darkstalkers. It's not that she's the protagonist, that's technically Dimitri. It's not that she's the icon of the franchise, that's clearly Morgan. She's not even the only morally good character in the series, there's actually quite a few of those. But she's the one who is described as a wandering soul helping those in need. The only other one who's a contender for that is John Talbane, and Felicia has the benefit of a more distinct fighting style, which would be roughly the same as it was in her home series, as well as the Marvel vs. Capcom titles. So, since there's no need to further dive into that, let's go to the costumes, because I have a point or two I'd like to make. Felicia would still be in her classic attire by default, but I want it to be her OG design. It's not that her outfit has been censored or anything over the years, not that I could find, but in the older games, she had more muscle to her limbs and a deeper tan line. This made her flesh more distinct from her fur, and it made her a more visually vibrant character, which her vibrant personality deserves. She doesn't have any alternate costumes in the games proper beyond palette swaps, but the browser-turned-mobile game Onimusha Soul did have her as a guest character with a unique outfit, and you know what, I'd say that's good enough for me. For her crossover cosplay, her personality is very befitting of Nijide from My Hero Academia, but that same series has an actual superhero group of cat girls, so I say go with that and make Ragdoll the default color scheme.
Choose your character.
Your Forger, the assassin housewife herself. Somehow that's a more common trope than the werecat. Now, it might be easy to say that I picked her over Lloyd just because of waifu principle. However, her personality was the biggest factor of getting her into the roster. Being a master assassin with a genuine heart of gold, Yor's willingness to commit intense acts of violence, followed by a comedic naivete about, well, almost everything outside of that wheelhouse, makes her very interesting for any characters to interact with. She's the character I'm the most interested to see interact with others in this base roster. From Izuku trying to teach her non-lethal takedown techniques for the pre-fight banter, to thinking that Frank West's photograph of her is him blowing her cover. Her pre-fight banter has a lot to work with. However, this is a fighting game, not a visual novel. Yor's gameplay would be her martial art prowess, with her using her combat needles for combo finishers. Forks and tennis balls can be used for her projectiles, the former being a ground attack and the latter being a downward air attack or shot upwards as an anti-air. Her hyper combos can see her using knives for rapid attacks, performing pressure point strikes to weaken an opponent, or leaning into her comedic hyper strength for a level 3. Like maybe hitting an opponent really hard and really far away, just to buy some time to talk with Anya. As for her costumes, this was surprisingly difficult to decide. Each character gets 2 costumes for their franchise, but Yor has 3 major outfits most know her for. The first is her clerk outfit from City Hall, the second is her backless sweater for her casual wear, and finally is her formal wear that doubles as her assassination outfit. That one should definitely be her default outfit, given that most render art and manga covers tend to depict her in it. As for her franchise reference costume, after a lot of back and forth and a walk to the gas station to get the mind moving, I ultimately landed on her casual wear, since it's the more visibly distinct outfit for her. Thankfully, her crossover cosplay was much easier to decide, as she would be dressing up as Ada Wong from the RE4 remake, specifically using the long coat design they gave her. Ada is too perfect to not be her choice for crossover cosplay, but as cool as it would be, almost all of Ada's default outfits, the various red clothing they give her, it's too close to Yor's casual wear, so the trench coat it is. Now that I think about it, I bet Leon would have a line saying Yor reminds him of Ada, and I would love to see how she misinterprets that.
Choose your character.
Morgan Esland, gaming's most iconic succubus. It helps that she's more than just a hot woman with horns. From the bat motif, which I think is a nod to the fact that she was originally meant to be a vampire, to her abnormally long limbs, to the mechanical aspects of her combat style, to her surprisingly relaxed demeanor. Morgan just stands out as a character, and this is from a fighting game already filled with some of Capcom's more extravagant designs and characters. I think that's a big thing that helped Morgan leapfrog Dimitri as the face of the franchise. As while Dimitri is a very straightforward vampire character with a few unique twists, Morgan canonically subverts a lot of the succubus archetypes, while still being worthy of the moniker of the monster. Now, I say canonically because the Udon comics made her a very, very typical portrayal of the monster, with her being portrayed as both having to kill humans to live and enjoying the sexual process of doing so. Whereas in the game's lore, her family could survive off stimuli alone and were primarily dream eaters, having no need to steal the souls of the living, and in fact preferred not to. But since Morgan had terrible luck with the nighttime munchies, she got her dopamine hits from flirting about in the human world and fighting the other Darkstalkers. She was hedonistic and on the shameless side, but would be friendly, approachable, and generally very kind. Thankfully, most of the Versus series follows the game lore instead of the Udon comics, so that probably wouldn't be an issue here. And yes, I did spend this entire time glazing her character for this segment, because Morgan's moveset is pretty standardized at this point. Same could be said for her outfits. You know what she would look like by default. It probably won't surprise you that her Creature of the Night getup would be the franchise reference outfit, and her crossover cosplay would be Kurumu Kurino from Rosario the Vampire. The only thing about that might surprise you is that Rosario the Vampire is considered Shonen Jump. I did have to fact check this a few times, but it is a Shonen Jump IP. It just never made it to Shonen Jump magazine. It was in their monthly series instead. And besides, Lilith has shown that Morgan would look just fine with short hair. Fitting that hair would be the final talking point with her, given the next fighter.
Choose your character.
Bobobo. Alright, between being a huge fan of Super Smash Bros. And watching a lot of Thorgies build the roster, I am aware that you need weird choices. And you don't get much weirder than the WarioWare of Shonen Jump himself. For those who have never seen the masterpiece of Bobobo, it follows the titular Fist of the Nose Hair Master and his ragtag group of increasingly offbeat and disturbing allies as they fight what us in America came to know as the Chrome Dome Empire in their sinister quest to make everyone look like binging with Babish. Not just the men, but the women and children as well. The humor of the original Japanese version was wordplay based on Japanese kanjis on top of lampshading Shonen Jump tropes. The first half of that doesn't translate into English, so the dub had to get creative, and oh boy did 4 kids cook with this one. Imagine if the dub of Ghost Stories had to rely on being witty instead of shock value, and if each character had more than 3 jokes tied to them. Bobobo's nose hairs would be his main method of attack, and these would make him a grappler, which this roster desperately needs more of. However, he wouldn't have a lot of range to counteract that. In fact, his longest range attack would be spinning Dawn Patch around him at violent speeds, allowing him to knock people away from him if he desires or destroy projectiles. However, given that Bobobo is the Hachike King, most of his moves would be very random or nonsensical, so trying to give him a really coherent moveset in a video like this, it feels like it's counterintuitive. But in a desire for there to be at least something to talk about, 2 of his many moves throughout the series could be used to bring back moves from previous Versus games, ideally as hyper combos. For example, remember Iceman's really overpowered shield? Well, let's rework that into a defensive hyper combo in the form of the Loving Love Umbrella, and the Judgment of Earth can be a rework of Gamma Crush from the Hulk. I'd also make one of his useless non-combat moves be a level 3 taunting hyper combo, in the spirit of one Dan Hibiki. Now, in terms of costumes, Bobobo would use his normal getup by default, though one of his alternate colors would have to be his super form, which is just him in a jacket. His franchise reference costume would be Beautiful Bobobo from the anime's OP. And for his crossover cosplay, he would dress up as Frank from Darkstalkers, complete with zombie-colored flesh. Though if you also had him dress up as Dan Hibiki, I would not complain. Okay, so now that we have another grappler in the roster, you know what this group of characters really needs? Villains. Genuinely awful people to fight at the end of the arcade mode for the final Dragon Ball. And both Capcom and Shonen Jump deserve a character of that caliber.
Choose your character.
Jeddah. While by no means the most evil character in Darkstalkers, Jeddah has a goal that is the most immediately threatening to the world at large. His desire to combine all souls of the living into a single life form, to have the demon realm be reborn, translates pretty easily into the context of a crossover, even if MVCI was objectively weird with how it interpreted these ambitions. But I can't be too hard on Infinite this time. They actually managed to make him work in a T-rated context. In fact, I even prefer the Shadow Realm version of his moves, as dragging an opponent into a Shadow game is way more interesting than just a black screen. While this does have me wondering what would be possible if Jeddah was a Mortal Kombat guest character, T-rated Jeddah is surprisingly uncompromised, and his moveset has already been shown to work in not just a versus game, but specifically a slower 2v2 one. Now, you get his normal costume by default, but he doesn't really have a franchise costume. Even his DLC special costume in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was created just for that game, and it was more of a recolor with some minor differences in design, so gonna have to come up with something unique here. I would elect to give him a soul form. Think of the semi-translucent Force Ghost from early Star Wars as a reference. The idea is that this is Jeddah no longer needing a physical form for his plans to proceed. For his crossover cosplay, I would give him many of the features of Ryuk from Death Note. Now, would you like a little bit of a fun fact? Jeddah Japanese voice actor has also voiced a Shonen Jump character from a fighting game that Capcom published. And that character just so happens to be the main Shonen Jump villain.
Choose your character.
Dio. Being the main antagonist of both parts 1 and 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Dio serves as both the main Shonen Jump villain and his franchise representative. I wouldn't blame any longtime JoJo fans at just rolling their eyes at this, as the franchise is much larger than this one character, and Dio is undeniably the safest option you could go with. But he just works really well with what this roster needs, that being a major villain and a strong JoJo rep. I can't help it if Dio kills two birds with one stone. And to be fair, he does have some good combat contributions. Being a vampire gives him access to skills like health regeneration, flight, and shadow-based teleportation, and that alone would give him some decent options. But his stand's physical and supernatural powers are what make him interesting and infamous. The ability for the World, his stand's name, to fly out a certain distance from him and let him engage in melee combat without having to get too close, alongside his infamous time stop abilities, would give him devastating combo potential. Although with a maximum of only 5 hype bars in this game, I don't think you'll get anything as crazy as the Capcom fighting game that one meme comes from. At least, until he gets access to his level 3 hyper combo and unleashes Time Rush Barrage. His Part 3 outfit would serve as his default attire, and his franchise reference costume would be how he appeared back in Part 1. His crossover cosplay, however, I went back and forth on. I initially wanted it to be M. Bison from Street Fighter, but decided against it in favor of something a bit more thematic. Dimitri from Darkstalkers. Not quite playable status, but hey, more than he usually gets in these games. And while Dimitri may not be as evil as Dio, give him access to the world and see how long that lasts. And thus, we have the base roster: Ryu, Goku, Chun-Li, Krillin, Juri, Frieza, Rashid, Beerus, Mega Man, Izuku, Zero, Bakugo, Tronbon, Tanjiro, Leon, Nezuko, Nemesis, Luffy, Frank West, Nami, Batsu, Naruto, Mike Hager, Sasuke, Dante, Tobi, Nero, Ichigo, Asura, Tatsumaki, Felicia, Yor, Morrigan, Bobobo, Jeddah, Dio, and ideally as pre-order and unlockable characters, Sakura Kazugano and Vegeta the Space Monkey. While I don't think this would be anyone's perfect roster, it is one that most would at least find satisfying, and you'd get at least some characters you want in. You have your mainstays, some Capcom characters people have been wanting for some time, some less obvious Shonen Jump picks, and legacy characters from both sides. These 38 characters would be the S-tier inclusions, the cast of characters that would make up the bare minimum roster for a game like this, where we're only getting what's there at launch. There will be other characters to go over, but let's take a reprieve to talk about some other things for the game, like stages. And I would say that at this point, having 15 stages without having to recycle each other's assets should not be too big of an ask for a fighting game. Especially if the game isn't aiming to have a story mode that needs certain locations, and this isn't like Smash Bros. Where the stages have different functionalities we need to balance. I suppose this could also be an example of how visuals needing to always be pushed to the max could work against games, but that's an argument you've probably heard to death by now. So, what stages would Shonen Jump vs. Capcom have? Well, for the neutral stage, it would be the training alley from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. A spoiler alert, you're going to be seeing quite a few stages from that game return. But I think this is the best looking training area in any Capcom game, opting to instead be a decrepit old building that's been outfitted to help people train for fighting via spray paint. And I think this aesthetic fits Shonen Jump just as well, if not better, than Tatsunoko, so bring it back. For Street Fighter, I went with the shopping district. This is Chun-Li's stage. And the way I see it, Ryu has already gotten his stage in Super Smash Bros., so Chun-Li can have this one. I did also consider the Field of Fate stage that pops up from time to time in Street Fighter, but I took the simpleton approach. The Street Fighter stage would be the one where you fight in the streets. Dragon Ball gets Planet Namek. I don't even think I need to justify this one. It's one of Dragon Ball's most iconic and visually distinct locations that held what many consider to be one of, if not the strongest arcs in the series. The Castell Shaft from Mega Man Legends returns from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. I'm also pretty sure I did not pronounce it correctly. But it also just seems unfair to me that the Versus title that dropped Tronbon was the one that got her Flying Fortress. Well, her family's, but you get the idea. Now, for Naruto, I wanted to go with the Hidden Leaf Village because the architecture of this franchise is very unique in Shonen Jump's lineup, but instead I'm gonna go with the archetypal Final Valley, as I'm not gonna pass up on a chance for there to be a waterfall stage in a fighting game. Plus, this area is of equal importance to both Naruto and Sasuke, so it thematically fits as well. Resident Evil's contribution to the stage selection would be Umbrella Labs from Resident Evil 2. A Raccoon City wouldn't be a bad choice, as it would be an American town where Shonen Jump's more realistic locations are based on Japan, but the chance to put various bioweapons or mutated characters in the background test tubes is just way too great of an opportunity to pass up. For One Piece, I just decided to go with the stage from my favorite arc back when I read at the beginning of the series. That would be the Baratai Sailing Restaurant. Baratai? I don't know, it's been even longer since I've watched the anime compared to reading the manga. Now, granted, since you would be fighting inside the dining hall, the at-sea angle would be almost non-existent. But The Devil Works Part-Timer is not a Shonen Jump series, Food Wars takes place at a school, and there are no Shonen Jump franchises that take place in a Waffle House. So, if I want a stage that takes place at a restaurant, this'll have to do. The Dogstalker series gets Morgan's Castle from, you guessed it, Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. This game had the best stages of any Versus title, and I will die on that hill. From My Hero Academia, Dagobah Beach. A nice sunset on a beach that's been cleaned through Deku's training and All Might's community service. I also considered the Fire Zone from the USJ, but Sasuke's flame control gimmick as well as Ashley's lantern attack made it a unviable option. The Iceberg Arena would be a stage from Power Stone 2. While the series didn't manage to get a fighter in the base roster, a submarine in the Arctic Ocean is too visually strong a location to pass up on. For similar reasons, Yu-Gi-Oh! Gets the Battle City Blimp, starting at the stadium and slowly rising into the night sky. Our final Tatsunoko vs. Capcom recreation would be the Willamette Parkview Mall. And that's only because Frank West came back. If it was Chuck Green, it would be the Fortune City Arena. Bobobo would have Bobobo World, a pocket dimension of Bobobo's own creation. It's meant to be a place for people to truly let themselves be free, or die trying, or until he gets bored and feels like they've had enough suffering. Taiyo Academy from Rival Schools is the final Capcom stage. I couldn't really decide on which of the super schools from Shonen Jump's lineup to go with. So, in the end, I decided that since Rival Schools was a Capcom series about schools fighting it out, it would actually be a better fit than any given Shonen Jump series. And for the final stage, both in terms of Shonen Jump and in general, Dio's Castle. This would be the final stage in the arcade mode, where you fight either Jedha or Dio. Oh, on that note, let's quickly go over arcade mode in a little more detail. It would be called Dragon Ball Quest, just to make it clear what it's about. It would open with a cutscene at Dio's castle, with either Jedha or Dio on the floor defeated, with the victor of the two holding up the 7-star Dragon Ball. As they put it next to their head to observe it, it would fade away to your character finding the 1-star Dragon Ball. This is to silently convey the goal and the final destination of the mode, with each fight having a random character team up with your fighter as you fight for the next Dragon Ball. The sub-boss at the third battle for the 4-star ball will always be against a single more powerful opponent, either Goku, Ryu, Sakura, or Vegeta. The final battle has you take on whichever of the final bosses you saw take the ball at the opening, and they would inevitably get fused together into Jetta Dio for a final battle. Now, at one point I wanted to write an ending for every single character on what their wish would be when they got all 7, but there were way too many characters that I did not know enough about to give a decent ending for, and this video's already going on pretty long. I will, however, share with you my favorite of the wishes I came up with to give you an idea for what I'm going for. Ryu wishes for the ability to recover all of his stamina in a single night's sleep, so he can train rigorously without consequence. Goku wishes for the Street Fighter cast to know the power of the Saiyans, seeing potentially a worthy challenge in them at his full power. Juri wishes for her own Chun-Li to have. This is manifested in the form of Shadow Lady, which Juri considers good enough. Beerus wishes for Earth to never run out of food. While he accidentally solves world hunger, it is solely because Earth has his favorite food he's ever had. Tronbon wishes that Surfbot number 40 would stop messing around on her bed and actually do something productive. The Eternal Dragon states that this wish is beyond his power. Izuku doubts the dragon can actually grant a wish, but after some deliberation, wishes for Ochako to never get sick using her quirk. Even after he discovers proof of this working, he doubts the Dragon Balls had anything to do with it. Nemesis wishes for the revival of every single member of the STARS unit so he can hunt them down and kill them again. Nami wishes for a tangerine tree that will never wilt and always bears fruit. Mike Hagger wishes for the power to clean up his city. This manifests in the form of him becoming bulletproof. Yor wishes to become a master chef so she can be a better housewife. This would cut to her teaching characters like Chun-Li, Sasuke, Frank West, and Tanjiro how to cook her grandmother's stew. Morgan wishes to find a human who has endless pleasant dreams that she can feast off of, and whose company she would enjoy while being able to put up a decent fight. She would then meet Yamcha. Bobobo wishes for the Eternal Dragon to get a year's paid vacation and offers to share with him a cup of Hajike tea. Jetta kills the dragon and steals its soul, revealing he had no interest in the wish and realized the balls had a fraction of a large and powerful soul inside them. Dio wishes to be made immune to sunlight. When the dragon claims this power is beyond him, Dio turns the dragon into a vampire and suggests he figures out how to do so, or then the dragon will die if it's ever summoned in sunlight, then letting the Dragon Balls scatter. Now, I did also promise you I would cover those online modes. It would have ranked and unranked, of course, but something I would personally like to see with ranked is a more nuanced judging system than just wins versus loses. You know, think of something like how many points you lose for losing a battle is also determined by how close you were to winning. You know, just stuff like that. Now, what I think would be welcome is a mode or two that's just for properly messing around online. Many fighting games tend to neglect that, and even Super Smash Bros., which outright sees itself as a party game, has its goofier modes locked to offline only. A King of the Hill mode where after each round, the previous winner has a new downside inflicted upon them. The Smashdown mode from Smash Ultimate where you need to constantly pick new fighters between fights. A tournament mode where each battle can have a unique condition or two both players must deal with. You know, just stuff like that to make it so that playing online is more than just hyper-competitiveness. I think it would help improve the game's longevity. And to finish off this intermission segment, I would like to go over the concept of hostesses. These would be female characters in the game's main menu that give a description of each mode you highlight before you select it, with their personalities determining how they describe it. The first time I noticed something like this in a game was back in Clash of Ninja on the Wii, but I just like the idea of having characters on the menu to reference those beyond what's in the base roster. The only two female hosts that would be available from the get-go would be Makoto from Street Fighter and Chi-Chi from Dragon Ball. But you could also unlock Ashley Graham from Resident Evil, since she would already be a part of Leon's moveset, or Hime from Bleach, Rouge from Power Stone, and Mizore from Rosario the Vampire. Ideally, you'd be able to pick which one is available from the options menu, or select multiple characters that the game could then randomly pick every time you boot up the menu. Okay, let's take a quick bathroom break. Okay, everyone back from the bathroom? Got snacks? Good, let's resume. We've already gone over the base roster, but what if development went smoothly? No massive hang-ups, no big issues getting characters to look right or work properly, the legal issues were handled swiftly. What if the roster could go just beyond the bare minimum for the launch of the game? Well, that's where we get to A tier. These 6 characters legit deserve to be in the base roster, I just couldn't justify giving them a slot. So it probably won't surprise you to learn that the first 2 are revisiting the well of Street Fighter and Dragon Ball again. Street Fighter 3 never got a spot in the base roster, hence why Makoto was the choice for the hostess. But with more character slots now open, that's no longer an issue, so who gets in? Well, the correct answer would have been Alex, the main character of Street Fighter 3, and I wouldn't mind him, he was fun to play as in Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. The fan favorite choice probably would have been Makoto, and I would have been fine with her. She was fun to play as in Street Fighter 4, despite being nerfed from her godlike status in Third Strike. But personally, I'm just going with my favorite option on this one, Dudley. He was created to represent how boxing is the gentleman's sport in the series, whereas other boxers are villainous by nature, most notably Balrog. He embodies this to the point that the only reason he defeats the game's main villain, Gil, is to get his car keys back. Even his insults have a sense of upper-class sportsman to them. It just makes him a very one-of-a-kind character. Being a boxer makes him the ultimate rushdown character. No time to waste trying to play footsies, letting him get close is often a fast way for your health bar to lose weight. His ranged options are on the mediocre side, but his ability to backpedal and follow up or easily counter enemies makes him a monster at close range, on top of being one of the larger characters in the roster. He'd be another character whose moveset shouldn't be too hard to figure out in a game like this. His costumes are honestly the most limiting aspect of him. His gentleman getup would be the default, of course, but Street Fighter 4 is the only time he's gotten proper alternate costumes. And out of all of them, I'd say his Halloween attire is the best bet. The Undead Royal Guard is a striking outfit, and would make him distinguishable from his standard appearance. It also reminds me of Zombie U, and that's just cheating at this point. His Shonen Jump costume would be Azura, a character from the relatively new Do Retry series, where a Japanese war orphan gets a career in boxing to fund his little sister's medical recoveries. A fitting character for Dudley to reference. Now, as far as the Dragon Ball edition goes, Dragon Ball Daima wasn't a thing when this project began, and Superheroes is technically where I grabbed Vegeta, so that really only leaves GT as an option. And there aren't many options from that series. There's Pan, and to be fair, she wouldn't be a bad choice. The little robot she comes with could give some extra options other characters don't have, but in the end, she's another Dragon Ball Laser Blaster. Option 2 is Baby, but he's better suited for an arcade mode final boss, and that role has already been taken by Dio. I could go with Future Trunks, but I don't want to waste one of my Sword Fighter slots on him, and I don't want to overuse the Saiyans. So that leaves us with the Shadow Dragons, and at that point, we may as well go to the top. Omega Shenron. Being the last of the Shadow Dragons, the final form of Shenron, and the final boss of Dragon Ball as a series, Omega Shenron has all the elemental powers of the previous dragons alongside his own pure evil attacks, which serve as dark versions of Goku's moves. So his hyper combos would just be a matter of picking favorites. But while I just mentioned how Dudley would be on the larger side of the character roster, Omega Shenron would be this game's Sentinel, and even that would be shrinking him down. This would actually be a weakness of his, as it would make it very easy for attacks to connect with him, and it might make it hard for him to properly combo some of his moves if you don't get the timing right. So, depending on who you ask, he might need to get the Ridley treatment to make him a more viable option. Sadly, he has literally no options for costumes, as changing him to his base form for his alternate costume could present hitbox issues, and his possessed form in the series is almost indistinguishable. So, the Xenoverse version of him, where he's purple with an evil aura, is the only thing I can think of, since the skin color and auras can be mixed and matched for interesting color combinations for the different color palettes. And for his crossover cosplay, I landed on Rajang from Monster Hunter. That would look pretty weird, and I'm 100% confident I mispronounced that, but it's the best I could think of for him. Okay, moving back over to Capcom, I decided I wanted one of the original 3 characters they made for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I was able to drop a Mingo easily, though not happily, since I don't imagine him working too well in 3D with some of his attacks. So that left me with Sun Sun and Ruby Heart. Do I go with the Journey of the West reference being able to interact with the Dragon Ball cast, or the treasure hunting Sky Pirate meeting the One Piece crew? After some deliberation, I chose Ruby Heart for a couple of reasons. First, if I want to avoid overloading the Saiyans from Dragon Ball, why should I go with the Capcom character who's literally cut from the same cloth? Second, Ruby is, however loosely, a more defined character when looking at the same game both come from, which leads to the third and final point. Ruby Heart would be a lot more useful for a single-player mode. Yes, I would forego a cinematic story mode, but having her and her airship serve as the starting point of the adventure, or even as the way players travel around, well, that would work pretty well. After all, lore-wise, she was the one in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 who was gathering all the characters across the different worlds to fight Abyss. So, for her costumes, what could possibly work as an alternative for her first-class pirate clothes? Well, I think she should dress up and reference one of the other two, and for my money, I'd prefer to give her a Mexican-inspired outfit with a poncho and sombrero as a nod to Amigo. And for her crossover cosplay, I'd say Nico Robin's blue dress and hat would work pretty well, especially since Ruby was already one of the more adult character in Capcom's lineup at the time. Moving over to Shonen Jump's lineup, I think it's time we get a Yu-Gi-Oh! Representative. I'm actually shocked I didn't get one into a base roster, but I wanted to avoid playing too many favorites with the core cast. So, in the end, I decided I would go with Yugi Moto using the Dark Magician. Actually, the Dark Magician himself would be the playable character. I ultimately chose to go with Yugi over Kaiba because, well, if I was going to use Kaiba, I need to use the Blue Eyes White Dragon, and at that point I need to choose to bring the Kaijus back. Which, spoiler alert, I'm not. Now, for those of you who are thinking Jump Force beat me to this idea, remember that game made the duelists themselves playable, with the monsters being their attacks. Here, I would have the Dark Magician be the fighter, with Yugi, specifically what we Westerners refer to as Yami Yugi, being in the background to activate certain cards for hyper combos. Imagine if the Pokemon trainer in Smash Bros. Actually did something. After all, the Dark Magician is his ace monster. Yugi and the Dark Magician would have a special UI below their health bars showing what cards Yugi has in his hand. If the card is grayed out, that means it's an empty slot, while each color it can turn into represents a hyper combo option. The player must taunt to draw a card. The card draw is almost instant, but you're taunting in a fighting game. Be smart or get hit. A yellow card allows the player to summon a Magnet Warrior for 1 meter. If the final input is a weak attack, it's the next Magnet Warrior. The strong attack skips to the next one. This matters because the 3 Magnet Warriors serve as extensions of different combos. The orange cards can also summon monsters as a level 1 hyper combo, but these are tribute monsters and you need to have enough Magnet Warriors for the tribute. If the input ends in a light attack, you sacrifice 1 Magnet Warrior for the Dark Magician Girl. The heavy attack requires all 3, and you sacrifice them for Valkyrion the Magma Warrior. Valkyrion can work as all 3 of them in terms of combo extensions if you want to. The Velvet cards are trap cards and would be level 2 hyper combos. The string ending in a light attack places a spellbinding circle on the ground. If an opponent walks into it, it would take away their ability to use their hype meter as well as certain special actions for about 5 seconds. If the string ends in the strong button, it instead plays down a Dust Tornado. It works the same way, activating if it gets stepped on, but instead summons a giant twister that deals decent damage. The Dark Magician Girl will follow up both traps to deal extra damage if she's been summoned, and the traps only remain on the field for about 10 seconds. Green cards are spell cards. Both are only level 1 moves. If the ending input is light, it's Pot of Greed, which lets you draw 2 cards. If it's heavy, it's Card Destruction, discarding all the cards in Yugi's hand and drawing 5 new ones. The Dark Magician's level 3 hyper combo is holding the opponent in place with Dark Magic, then performing the Dark Magic attack. Any Magnet Warriors will attack while the opponent is being held down, with Valkyrion having an extra powerful slash at the end for the target. The Dark Magician Girl will significantly amplify the damage of the proper Dark Magic attack. Does all of this sound too complicated to be good? Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh!, where everything you loved growing up is suboptimal to the point of being useless. But at least the costumes would be straightforward. The alternate costumes simply would be the Dark Magician and the Dark Magician Girl swapping positions, and the Pharaoh would get his Egyptian clothes. The crossover cosplay would have the Dark Magician dress as Magic Man from Mega Man, Dark Magician Girl would become Trucy Wright, and Yugi would dress up as Lan from Battle Network. Whew, I hope the next character is simpler. Damn it. Look, after that last aneurysm of a character, I don't feel like thinking too hard on this one. So, for Edward Falcon, I'm just gonna plagiarize Thorgy's idea and move on. Edward would use his normal mix of boxing and kick attacks. No, he's not considered a kickboxer, and no, I don't know why. Until he can gather enough Chaos Emeralds to become Captain Falcon. Normally, his hyper combos are using items like machine guns, flamethrowers, or bazookas, but him turning into the Red Whirlwind would unlock his stronger moves and more powerful zoning tools like his missiles. He can even gather more than the 3 power stones he's required to at minimum, but if he gets hit too much, he'll power down to normal Edward. So, he would look like his normal self by default, and his franchise reference costume would be him dressing up as his father, Pride Falcon, aka the Green Whirlwind, which is what he would turn into. And for his crossover cosplay, I'd say Saitama, aka the titular One Punch Man. Normal Edward would be in his pajamas, with the transformation being One Punch Man's proper superhero outfit, ideally with a goofy Mii-style helmet over the protagonist. Okay, my mental break is over. It's time to try again with the next character, and that would be Edward Elric. Huh. What are the odds? 2 Edwards back to back. But while I've yet to properly go through Full Metal Alchemist, cut me some slack. Anime takes time to watch, and time I put towards that is time not going to stuff like this. But even with that, his inclusion would be easy to justify. After all, Full Metal Alchemist is one of the most critically acclaimed Shonen Jump series to date, and his moveset is pretty cut and dry. He can transmutate his arm into various weapons mid-combo or for hyper combos, so just pull upon references to the series for that. And his characterization can allow for solid interactions, rather if you decide that he still has his god complex or if this is after the series humbled him. And even his outfits aren't that difficult to figure out. You have his normal look by default, with a black jacket to reference his appearance in the final episodes. His franchise reference costume can be his disguise he donned for the second trip to Lore, or Leor, I don't know how to pronounce that, and I do not know the significance of it. And his crossover cosplay would be Jean from God Hand. Poor Jean, gone but not forgotten. But you gotta admit, it fits Edward surprisingly well. Okay, we have the most optimistic starting roster possible. It would be praised as a miracle if a game like this were to launch. So, now what? Where does the roster go from here, now that we have the strong base roster? Well, in the context of this video, this goes to B tier of priority. But what would that logically entail? Based on the history of the games industry, DLC. Specifically, a single, longer than average season of DLC. Yeah, this isn't going to be a live service game, and the Capcom Vs. series statistically have shorter lifespans than the mainline Street Fighter series anyway, so I'd say it works out. And starting things off, we have Monster Hunter. I'm just going to give you a heads up, the Capcom side of this tier will not be featuring any new characters, but instead be bringing back characters from different Vs. titles. And first up is the Monster Hunter from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Definitely the most creative addition to the Capcom side of that roster. Using the female avatar also adds another female fighter to the game. The focus on clubs and bows over, let's say, a sword also gave her a more unique fighting style. Overall, just a smart addition. The Monster Hunter, or Huntress, I guess, would stick to the Rathalos armor by default. The franchise reference costume would be the Kirin armor. Fluffy winter armor that would be the perfect alternative to the Magma scale armor she normally wears. As for her crossover cosplay, she would dress up as Shinobu from Demon Slayer. The insect theming would also make it look like as if there was an insect monster that had been slain to make it. I wonder if any other characters would have worked better with Demon Slayer costumes. Let me know if you think I've missed out on some opportunities here in the comments below. But one opportunity I do know I missed out on was with the Shonen Jump side in general not having nearly as many villains. So to remedy that, we're gonna start with Grimjaw from Bleach. In part because he's very skilled with a sword, but prefers to fight hand-to-hand. This leads to a very interesting gameplay style. The simplest application of this idea is that he fights hand-to-hand with certain combo enders or moves having him pull out his sword for extra range or damage. The more complicated idea would be taking notes from Gen in Street Fighter IV and making him a stance fighter. Now, I doubt they would make him as demanding as Gen was, as he had to swap fighting styles mid-combo to be even remotely viable in a more serious setting. But someone who alternates between martial arts and swordplay would definitely be unique, something not many 2D fighters do. I mean, that's the very logic that makes me want Kasumi in Street Fighter VI. Now, as for his costumes, well, his pre-fight look would be the default. However, since most of his hyper combos would just be him using his soul attacks, or whatever the proper term in Bleach for those are, his full resurrection form wouldn't be needed to be used for combat. So the embodiment of deadly destruction could have his resurrection with the slash on his chest be the franchise reference costume. His crossover cosplay would be Virgil from Devil May Cry. I think Virgil could be a martial artist if he set his mind to it. Moving back to Capcom, we're gonna get the funny tiny Nightman himself, Arthur. He's just one of those offbeat fighters who's really cool with visual references, but can be difficult to play efficiently. There were versions of the base roster that actually had him in it, but I forgot exactly who took his spot. I want to say it was Nero, but none of the drafts that I have saved give me an exact answer. I just figured that Arthur wouldn't be the most missed character, but I could see him being saved for the DLC as a controversial choice. But with the power of post-launch support and $5, he can return. Since he would play like he normally does, let's just skip to the costumes. His standard knight armor would be the default. His boxes would change colors to match the different armor sets. Imagine a Red Knight Arthur bursting open to show him in red and black plaid boxers, for example. I'd bring over his Fallen Angel costume from Infinite for his franchise reference. Not entirely sure if that would count, but I like it. And his boxer form would be Zombie Arthur. His skin color would change instead of his boxers for the various alternate palettes. And his crossover cosplay would be Alphonse from Full Metal Alchemist. Seeing one of the tallest Shonen Jump characters now be one of the shortest is a funny mental image. And for his boxer form, it could instead be a Force Ghost without the armor. Maybe we should move on. Funny little Nightman just got a lot less funny. As it just so happens, the next character is literally designed to make you laugh, as much as he would probably hate it. So, you see, when I asked my buddy for those One Piece characters earlier, I specifically told him if he didn't give me a villain to represent the series, I would go with Buggy the Clown. His response? Do it. Yeah, between many villains being arc-specific, even many of the story-wide villains of the series, and Buggy being a comedy villain that performed the narrative equivalent of failing upward, my buddy actually thought that the slice-proof clown wasn't a bad choice. And there is potential, like allowing him to slice his own body into separate parts for attacks, like cutting his arms so his swords could fly around, or slicing his legs so they could walk and kick independently of his floating body. This is on top of the usual knife throws and buggy balls he could have for hyper combos. As for his costumes, I would combine his two main designs into one. He would wear only his post-time skip red cloak during the pre-fight banter, throwing it off to then show his original outfit with the modern hat and hairstyle. His franchise reference costume would be his tropical attire as he appeared in World Seeker. The crossover cosplay, to the surprise of probably no one, is Dead Rising's Adam the Clown. You could also go with Jack the Clown from Power Stone, that'd be fine, but, you know, I decided to play favoritism. And said favoritism doesn't stop there, as the next character for the Capcom side is Roll from Mega Man, specifically her classic incarnation. Now, you see, she appeared in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 as a clone of Mega Man, mostly just there to fill out the roster. She would be brought back only once for Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. Over the years, her TVC counterpart was seen as quite dangerous. Not necessarily top-tier material, but many of her hyper combos could be accessed through her standard combos, as well as her having the ability to buff all of her attacks by mopping up water several times over. I don't know if this would result in her being need to be nerfed for this game, but I kinda like the idea that one of the more dangerous DLC characters is just a little child robot. Now, Roll does need clarification for her costumes, as at first I considered giving her her Mega Man 11 outfit by default, but instead I made her default costume the Mega Man 8 outfit. It would give her the design most people remember from Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but with the much better TVC moveset. So, for her franchise reference costume, I'd be giving her the Rainy Day suit from Mega Man Powered Up. And for her crossover cosplay, she'd return the favorite to the Demon Slayer series by cosplaying as Nezuko Kamado. I tried to make it so characters weren't too tied together as for who dresses up as who, but this was just too perfect to pass up on. And speaking of characters I just couldn't pass up on, Hisoka from Hunter x Hunter. You see, this guy has a very particular trait in common with other characters in the roster, and no, it's not the idea of there being another evil clown. If anything, Hisoka is closer to a jester in theming. No, his similarity is to that of Yor, or Tatsumaki, in that he's representing a series that doesn't have the inclusion of its main character. But what made Hisoka the rep for Hunter x Hunter wasn't the need for more villains, or rather, not just the need for more villains. One of the more common action antagonist tropes is when they spare those with potential. The reasoning can vary, but it's a common enough trope within Shonen Jump to warrant such a character representing it. Between that, the lack of villains, and Hunter x Hunter deserving at least one rep, he fits the bill. With his ability to turn playing cards into proper lethal weapons, and being able to turn his aura into a gum-like substance, well, he definitely lives up to the trickster moniker of his theming, and would be one of the few out-of-franchise characters to understand what a threat Luffy is. Appearance-wise, his first costume would be the 1999 anime design, with his 2011 design being the franchise reference costume. And for his crossover cosplay, he would dress up as Jack from Power Stone. Man, I am really happy I did not waste that costume on Buggy. I also think both of them would try to kill each other if they ever met. And thus, we have our DLC. This would result in a 44-character roster with 6 DLC characters. If that seems a little hard to believe, imagine that A tier was the first wave of DLC, and B tier was the second wave. It's not terribly important at that point. What matters is that, for a game both companies would not want to take away from their personal live service fighters, this is the best case scenario. And while I may be a little biased, I'd say it'd be a pretty good roster. But what if, despite neither Bandai Namco nor Capcom wanting this to compete with their live services, the game does really well? With all the parties involved, it probably wouldn't push the needle too much profit-wise after everyone gets their cut, but what if it sold well enough for all relevant parties to deem a second game worth making? Building directly off the original, what does this mean for the roster? Well, using Marvel vs. Capcom 3's Ultimate version as an optimistic baseline, let's use it as an excuse to throw 12 more fighters into the ring. This extended C tier is for those new to the second game, and starting things out, we're going back to the well one last time. For, at this point, there's no excuse to not have a Street Fighter VI representative. Every other major franchise has a rep, unless I feel like adding an EX character, which I don't. And I do have a favorite choice for this particular entry, Jamie. Part of this is because he's my favorite foil the series has introduced since Ken. And this game actually doesn't have much in the way of hard foils, definitely on the Capcom side. Part of it is because I like his gimmick of getting stronger and more options as he gets drunk, doing a good job of playing into the drunken fist style, compared to characters like Bo Raicho where it feels largely cosmetic. And finally, he's just my favorite addition to Street Fighter VI, which has one of the stronger new character lineups in the franchise. Since I don't have any ideas for how to exaggerate him for the game, or even if he would really need it, I'll just get to his costumes. His normal outfit would be the default outfit, with his Outfit 3 from Street Fighter VI being the franchise reference costume, assuming something more appropriate hasn't come out since I recorded this video. For his cosplay, he would dress up as Shu from Yu Yu Hakusho. There are plenty of Shonen Jump characters who love themselves some liquor, but nothing short of another drunk boxer would be fitting for Jamie. And Shu, being an enemy-turned-ally who uses a drunken state to throw his opponents off guard, just feels right. Now, if you are hoping for the last Dragon Ball fighter to be Broly, you may want to pour yourself a drink, because I went with...
I'm a little reluctant to fight.
Okay, I know you're mad, but at least hear me out before you swear at me in the comments, please. So, this spot was originally going to go to Cooler, but that was back when Perfect Cell was the Dragon Ball Z representative, and so Cooler would represent the movies. However, with Frieza now taking that spot, Cooler feels like double dipping in a roster trying to minimize it. That goes double for Broly, who has the additional problem of his two incarnations competing with each other. Classic Broly is a much more hype antagonist, modern Broly is an actual character. The only other movie villain from Dragon Ball I would consider is Android 13, but as nice as the lines they gave him in the dub are, that's about all he has going for him if I'm honest. So, having exhausted the movie roster, I got the idea that maybe I should use a video game character to represent Dragon Ball spin-off material instead. And thus, Android 21 wins a spot she otherwise really has no business holding. Now, to be fair, I would emphasize the android part of her name, as she would be based on the scientist incarnation of herself. You could also have her work with Android 16 and Dr. Gero as assists to mix it up from how she appeared in Dragon Ball FighterZ, as well as being a nod to her family connections. Her default costume would be her lab coat. Her reference outfit would be the good version of her Majin Boobs form, minus the tail for hitbox reasons, and her crossover cosplay would be Seth from Street Fighter IV. Now, moving on to a character I'm pretty sure most of you have been wanting for some time, Beautiful Joe. This is another returning fighter, not much to say moveset-wise, but one change I'd give the action hero is combining his Tatsunoko cinematic hyper combo with the ability to slow down people from MVC3. Beyond that, I'm pretty happy with how he was previously portrayed, at least from a casual standpoint. His superhero costume would be the default, his civilian outfit of Average Joe would be the franchise reference costume. His crossover cosplay would see him dress up as Dragon Ball's Great Saiyaman. I wonder if that's how Great Saiyaman would look if he was in Dragon Ball Daima. I know a lot of people would want Beautiful Joe in the base roster, and at one point he was in there, but every time I edited the roster, he just kept falling down and down in priority as newer characters got introduced. But at least he has the sequel. Another character people probably would have wanted in the base roster, Jotaro from JoJo. Another one of the most recognizable characters in the home series, and the most reoccurring one at that. Jotaro's stand has similar abilities to Dio's, although not for most of the series. However, his version is very close range in use, and cannot be used rapidly. So his would be more about incorporating his time stops into his combos or using them for counters, and letting his stand physically help him in combat, but only when he's in breathing distance. This should help him maintain a distinct playstyle and complement his physical hand-to-hand combat, whereas Dio has throwing knives and extra attacks. Jotaro's default costume would be his appearance in Part 3, and his father costume in Part 6 would be the franchise reference. His crossover cosplay would be Hideo Shimamazu, the teacher from rival schools. There's no particular reason I went with this one beyond I just like how he looks, and I think it would be a very interesting design to see on Jotaro. Plus, another rival school's representative, especially since the next Capcom character is not from that series. Nope, it's Lady from Devil May Cry. She's definitely one of those how have you not been playable in these games sooner kind of choices. Well, in this game's case, she also lost her spot to Nero at some point during the game's roster formation. And if leaks and rumors are to be believed, she would have been an Infinite if that game was deemed worthy of supporting with post-launch DLC. And she's an understandable choice in either case. She's armed with a bazooka with a bayonet, giving her both melee and ranged combat options, and the DMC series is already very combo heavy, so there's plenty to work with. And that's before getting into her many machine guns for dealing with enemies. And as long as her personality is that of actually Lady and not whatever the hell the Netflix show is trying to do, she'll be a welcome addition. Her default costume would be her DMC4 outfit. Her writer suit would serve as a nice alternate outfit for her franchise reference. The crossover cosplay is one I am personally excited for. Launch from Dragon Ball. A specifically bad Launch, if I need to clarify that. It's just a perfect fit, and Launch is my favorite Dragon Ball character, at least of the OG series. If I can't put her in the game, this'll do. Now, moving back over to Shonen Jump, Yukihira Soma from Food Wars. Why him? Well, I'm actually just curious how you would translate him into a fighting game, for the same reasons I really want Cooking Mama and Smash. I just want to see how a chef would fight. Rather if that would translate to just using food, plates, and cookware as weapons, or trying to actually make cooking a mechanic for him, like if he cooks spicy food he gains the ability to breathe fire, or something sour giving him electricity for his attacks. Regardless of how you interpret that, he would be the Phoenix Wright of this game, the wait, what option? And a proper chef outfit would be his alternative costume. I couldn't really think of anything that would specifically work as a franchise reference costume. His crossover cosplay would be El Furete, sorry for butchering that. A very different kind of lethal chef, but a chef all the same. Now, moving back to Capcom, I'm gonna go with what might be the most contentious choice of the sequel roster, Nick Ramos. Now, you are either absolutely baffled or extremely happy by this choice. First, I know Microsoft co-owns everything about Dead Rising 3, but Phil Spencer will let you use anything he bought for a Crave case and a Baja Blast. So, legally, he could absolutely make it in if Capcom wanted him to. Now, I knew I was going to add one of the other Dead Rising protagonists, so why did I go with Nick? Well, part of it is his personality. He falls into the awkward yet brave archetype that Izuku does, while not being the same kind of character. But I also had a stronger moveset idea for how Nick would operate. If Frank would focus on the level up mechanic, Nick would focus on the combo weapons. So think of Nick as having 3 weapons for his attacks. His hammer saw, working like it did in the arcade mode of Dead Rising 3, a football, and a handgun. Similar to Phoenix Wright, he would have to scavenge for items, but he could only hold one at a time. He could either throw whatever he scavenged as a quick anti-air projectile, or combine it with one of his weapons. If it's a saw blade, he can combine it with either the hammer saw to make the cement saw like the Ripper, increasing the damage of his heavy attacks, or combine it with the football to make the Metal Mary, which is significantly faster with less knockback for better combo extensions. A grenade can be combined with the hammer for stronger light attacks, allowing it to resemble the Impact Blast of Dead Rising 3, or the Blast from the Past for those of you who remember Dead Rising 4, or combine it with the football to make the Hail Mary for stronger combo finishers. A flashlight could be combined with the hammer saw for the hammer end to be like the electric crusher, with more range on light attacks, or be combined with the pistol for a tactical handgun, allowing for faster firing. The toolbox could upgrade the cement saw into a chainsaw, giving heavy attacks much more range, or be combined with the handgun to convert it into Big D's 50 caliber pistol for far more damage per shot. And we'll say that Nick's level 3 hyper combo breaks all of his weapons and resets them to their base versions. And finally, each item can only have one upgrade applied. Another benefit to Nick being saved for a sequel instead of DLC is with his costume. His mechanic gear would be the default, but instead of any outfit, his reference should really be swapping him out for Dick Baker. If this would prove to be too much, you could give him a tuxedo or the mariachi outfit, but I think Dick would be worth going through the efforts of. After all, this would in theory not be the first time that a alternate costume required unique lines. And Dick was designed to use Nick's frame in animations, so it'd be a nice touch. The crossover cosplay would bring it back to Nick, though. and he would dress up as Hiraga Gengai from Ginatama. I would love to use Izuku for reasons I stated earlier, but Ginatama hasn't gotten any representation yet, and giving Nick those goggles and a fake beard is way too funny to ignore. Speaking of characters too funny to ignore, Koro Sensei from Assassination Classroom. This is strictly for his characterization, which is every bit as striking as his appearance. An assassin capable of destroying the world, he agreed to postpone that for a year if he gets to teach a class. A third year of high schoolers are tasked with having to kill him, a fact he's fully aware of and even okay with them trying so long as he gets to teach. And he does deeply care for his students. It makes for a very compelling character who has strong interaction potential with just about anyone in the roster. His powers also give him some good opportunities. His tentacles can cause explosions, stretch out as needed, create adhesive mucus to hold enemies in place, turn himself into a diamond-hard baseball and fire a laser, and any combination of attacks that his strength and speed allow for. He technically could have a grapple move where he absorbs an enemy, deals corrosive damage for a second or two, and then spits them out, but maybe that'd be better for a hyper combo. Regardless, there's a lot to work with. Speaking of options, his body has the ability to change colors based on the emotions he feels, which gives easy color palette options. A proper second option for a reference costume was considerably less easy, since like Bobobo, the Reaper doesn't change his signature outfit that often beyond individual gags. A reprieve is found towards the end of the series when he dresses in a military outfit, which at least kinda fits his character's backstory. Kind of, but it's better than nothing. For his crossover cosplay, Koro Sensei would be turned into Pyron from Darkstalkers. It's like if he truly was set out to destroy the world. Now, as for our next Capcom character, I'm going with Jill Valentine, and specifically, I would be bringing her back to her Marvel vs. Capcom 2 roots. I've always had a soft spot for this moveset, although her hyper combos would need a bit of a rework. While she could still summon zombies and hellhounds, giving her Chris Redfield's moves would work better. I mean, the grenade launcher was her item in the original game because she had the extra inventory space to take advantage of the grenade types. She otherwise has most of the same weapons that Chris does, so the weapons barrage combo that Chris had back in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Infinite would work for her without stepping on Leon's toes. As for a new move, she would have the bioscanner from Revelations. It would work like Frank's camera, but it wouldn't bring her level up. Instead, scanning enemies, based on the hit combo, would earn more red zone, as a nod to its ability to heal the player back in Revelations. There would be diminishing returns on a single scan though, so doing so repeatedly when you hit the cap would be more beneficial in some circumstances, but it could result in lower combos if used too often. I also imagine this would give her one of the lower health bars as compensation. Her default outfit would be the police uniform. It's still my overall favorite design they gave her. Now, I wanted to go with her RE3 design, but while it's iconic, it doesn't really complement this game's needs. In MVC3 with a single special costume, it was great, the best choice they could have made if you ask me. But with the need of alternate color variations, there's literally not enough clothing to work with. Like for example, her police uniform could have green and white for Rebecca Chambers, purple for Sheva, or all red for Ada. Now, her alternate costume could be the remake's version of her casual wear, but I find that to be a weaker design and not really fixing the problem of weak color options. So instead, considering we just referenced this game, let's give her the wetsuit from Resident Evil Revelations. An alternate color could be a black suit with blonde hair as a reference to Resident Evil 5, and a red and white color scheme to reference Claire Redfield's beta design. Her crossover cosplay would be My Valentine from Yu-Gi-Oh! On top of the obvious naming joke, My Valentine's outfit, barring her hairstyle, isn't that far away from what the unlockable civilian outfit in a PS1 era game for Jill Valentine would be. So, I say go with that. Okay, moving back to Shonen Jump, I think I need a comparatively new series, and I'm gonna go with Senku Ishigami from Dr. Stone. This is another character where I'm more curious about how he would play, although he's not as much of a random blank slate for me as Yukihara was. Given his status as a scientist and a creator, it's safe to say he would be a gadget user of some kind. The real question would be if these gadgets need to be made from scratch, or if he would just bring them pre-made with him into the fight. Now, given I've already made Nick Ramos so complicated and based on crafting, I would rather just have Senku bring the primitive tools with him into the moveset instead of needing to build them. Things like a strong magnet to pull enemies towards or away from him, primitive tools like a fishing spear or a stone axe, or gunpowder in a bag for a basic bomb. But beyond that, I'm open to ideas. I just think this guy deserves a spot here. His default costume would be his handmade clothing, referred to as the Man of Science attire. His alternate costume would be his grass skirt at the beginning of the series, and as an extra, the melon glasses. The melon helmet will give the outfit a uniform color scheme that will make it much easier to tell him apart with different color palettes. His crossover cosplay would take the form, or rather clothes, of one Dr. Light. Now he can truly dress up as the scientist he aspires to be. Also, more Mega Man. And since it's time for the next Capcom character, we're gonna bring back Firebrand. I didn't realize back in the day that this guy was supposed to be the monster you played as in Gargoyles specifically, but there's not much to be added. He was fun in both UMVC3 and MVCI, and while I don't think he's strictly necessary, he'd be a welcome veteran for a follow-up. You know what he would look like by default, as well as that goofy little dance he does. His reference costume would be the DLC costume he was given in UMVC3, which itself is based on a Ghost and Goblins boss. And his crossover cosplay is one final trip back to My Hero Academia, with it being the winged Nomu from the Hero Killer arc. Okay, I lied. It's not actually the last trip to My Hero Academia, because the final character in the base roster of Shonen Jump vs. Capcom 2 is Todoroki. Oh, Shoto. Now, this may come as a shock, but Shoto single-handedly blocked the most amount of characters from getting into the roster. First, I decided that My Hero wouldn't have any more playable characters than One Piece or Naruto did, so, naturally, he blocked anyone else from My Hero getting in, which was like 5 other characters. But then there's his fighting style, fire and ice attacks. Since he can already mix those together, this means that anyone with just one or the other got screwed over. On the note though, assigning fire to light attacks and ice to heavy attacks can make it easy to keep track of his combos, and what moves would do what. A heavy ground attack, making the ground in front of him become covered in ice, being able to toss fire into the air with light attacks, with his medium attacks just being regular punches. One idea could be letting the player create fire or ice pillars with basic hyper combos, but if the player makes an ice pillar on top of a fire one, or vice versa, it could result in a massive explosion via pressure. Just like the series proper, there's a lot of creative and potentially busted possibilities with him. As for his costume, his main hero suit would be the default outfit. His franchise reference costume would be the rich man disguise he donned for the Bakugo rescue operation. As for his crossover cosplay, Gil was the first and obvious choice, but regardless if it's body paint or a two-sided wetsuit, Gil's actual appearance is a bit too basic for somebody who already has one of the most basic designs on the Shonen Jump side. So instead, I'm gonna go with more Monster Hunter armor. The Iru Zeron armor, more specifically. It's more decorative while having the same visual gimmick as Gil. And apparently people were hoping in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite the Monster Huntress would get this armor in particular as well. So now we have the roster for a sequel. At 62 characters, such a feat would make it the largest versus roster to date. If I learned anything from Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, having another 12 characters might not be enough to justify buying an upgraded version of the same game. So what else could be done for a sequel? Well, the most obvious option is something I alluded to much earlier. Let's make it so that you can further customize the Baroque system with different Power Stones from, well, Power Stone. You see, you can make it so the player starts with 3 Power Stones by default that represent the default versions of Baroque I brought up earlier. The red one for the heavy attack that boosts damage, the green one for the medium that recovers health, and blue for the light attack that boosts hype generation. But the player could opt to swap any number of them out for alternative ones. So, for example, you could choose to trade one of those out for a yellow stone that makes it so Baroque makes you immune to chip damage, and the red health given up instead determines how long the effect lasts, making this the only one that's not dropped when the combo ends. Or, let's say, a purple stone that makes it so the opponent that you hit does not get any red health from that particular combo. Or an orange one that makes it so if you use a hyper combo during your Baroque, it only consumes half the required hype. The second idea would be a bigger single-player mode. I still wouldn't go for anything cinematic, but let's combine the idea of a Weapons Master mode with a roguelike. You have the Overworld map, where Ruby Heart gathers the fighters one by one, and the fights are largely predetermined. And then randomized dungeons where you can earn Zeni and various treasures, like the Dragon Balls to wish for an item unlock, or maybe even unlocking the extra Power Stones. Every fighter has their own health bar and it doesn't reset between fights, encouraging or outright demanding players to swap out fighters regularly as they recruit them. Chi-Chi could be found to cook food that gives pre-fight buffs, the RE4 merchant could sell items that recover health or let you escape dungeons, Gokin could give a checklist of tasks that you need to complete in your travels, and Might Guy could challenge you to increasingly difficult fights against certain opponents with certain debuffs or power stones being applied. Stuff like that. The third thing would be actual collectibles. Trophies would be ideal. I know they take time, but they're also models that don't need rigging or animating, and even having the trophy count of Super Smash Bros. Melee would give it way more worthwhile content than most fighting games get. But if that really is too much, and it very well might be, taking a note from Smash Bros. Ultimate and instead having trading cards would be fine. Just give them actual descriptions, reading is half the fun. It would also give the merchant more stuff to sell, right? Let's add another hostess or two for the main menu and a few more stages for battle. On top of the previous 6 menu hosts, let's add Alia from Mega Man X, Ino Yamayaka from Naruto, Ran Hibiki from Rival Schools, and Taya Gardner from Yu-Gi-Oh! And as for stages, let's go with a movie theater from Beautiful Joe. Ideally, it could play anime and video game openings in the background, albeit on mute. Hueco Mundo from Bleach. This is solely for its unique visuals. Bullseye Bar from Devil May Cry. I wanted to give this series a stage, but I was struggling to find one I was satisfied with. I went with Bullseye Bar simply because the atmosphere is very different here, and it could be populated with various characters from any given franchise observing the fight. Then there's the Garden Meetup location from Spy X Family. It just seems like a beautiful stage that would stand out from the other options, and would give Spy X Family a bit more love. A new generic option could be Dungeons. Obviously for the adventure mode, but the idea of an arena that could have several variations with different colored bricks or stones and some atmospheric differences in the background would allow you to get a lot of mileage out of comparatively few assets. You could even do what Soul Calibur 2 did and give them different themes like water, fire, poison, shadow, sand, and such. Finally, there would be pre-order bonuses for this game as well, but no characters this time. Instead, the pre-order bonuses would be extra crossover cosplays for certain characters. Ryu would dress up as Ryo-san, the protagonist of the longest-running Shonen Jump series. Goku would dress up as the original Son from the Capcom arcade game. Krillin would dress up as Arthur. Chun-Li would dress up as Yor, and in turn, Yor would dress as Chun-Li. Morgan would get a midnight outfit from My Hero Academia. Nami dresses as Nina from Breath of Fire 4. Batsu gets Gaz from Bobobo Bobobo. Jetta gets Demon King Piccolo. Dio gets M. Bison. Nick finally gets that Izuku costume, and Yukihira gets the Grand Meowster Chef from Monster Hunter World. Now, to address the DLC from the last game in the most optimistic way possible, Shonen Jump vs. Capcom 2 would have all the DLC bundled in by default, but you would need to purchase those characters and costumes in the in-game shop. A bit of a grind, if you ask me. But if you have all the DLC from the first game, they're available from the start alongside some extra Zenny as a customer loyalty bonus. I could go on endlessly, but you get the idea of what I would prioritize in a sequel. And to be fair, if this was the final form, I'd be more than happy with it. Well, honestly, the first iteration with 38 characters I'd be fine with, even if it didn't get too much support, assuming the game was fun to play and it had more than just online offerings. But the roster I made does have 6 characters left. D tier, if you will. So, one last time, let's explore the single season of DLC that Shonen Jump vs. Capcom 2 would get. The final 6 fighters. And first up, Trucy Wright, a stage magician from the Ace Attorney series. With this being a versus game, this would allow her to go beyond typical illusions and engage in real magic. Think Mumbo Jumbo from Teen Titans, albeit a little more restrained. At least, that's her by default. The secret trait with her would be throwing her hat and it turning into Mr. Hat, her stage puppet, and transforming her into a proper puppet fighter. In this stage, she would trade some of her more effective magic attacks in favor of Mr. Hat's physical attacks. To give an example for what I mean, on top of the obvious idea that Mr. Hat would hit harder than she does, let's say that for her level 1 hyper combo, Trucy tips her hat and it unleashes a plethora of fireworks all over the arena, flying in every direction and every distance. But if Mr. Hat is in play, it is instead fired from him directly machine gun style. Mr. Hat does much more focused damage, while Trucy's version gets way more coverage. And, for a more tactical option, you could have a unique hyper combo where she blindly throws knives into Mr. Hat, requiring her to put the opponent between her and him. Her normal costume would be her stage attire. Her younger version could be a palette swap, so that wouldn't do for a franchise reference. So instead, her alternate costume would be her Alice in Wonderland attire. And for her crossover cosplay, it's time to come full circle and have her dress up as the Dark Magician Girl. As a little touch, her hat would turn from the Dark Magician Girl's hat into the Dark Magician's when Mr. Hat is active. Now, while the first Capcom character may have been a rather obscure choice, the Shonen Jump choice is anything but. Roanoa Zoro. Or Zolo if you actually grew up with the 4Kids dub. Also, apparently that messed with the English manga for a while, but I don't remember that being a problem when I read it. I also don't know why 4Kids changed the name, period, because normally they do that to make it sound more English, and that was not what happened here. Regardless, the three-sword fighter has a very straightforward moveset. He can attack with any number of moves that use any number of his three swords, and he can infuse himself with his King Haki for stronger moves like Ryu can with his Ki Focus. His outfits aren't too complicated either. You would have his post-time skip design by default, and you could have post-time skip Zoro wearing his pre-time skip outfit as a franchise reference. And that's assuming you don't just go with anything from any given movie that I don't know about. His crossover cosplay would be Hayato from Plasma Sword. I think it would fit in pretty well with his other outfits while still being very distinct, and I'm a very basic nerd who likes the idea of Mr. Three Swords having 3 lightsabers. As an aside, I did consider going with Usopp at one point for an offbeat gadget character, but this sequel hasn't added in a proper sword fighter yet, so it would actually make Zoro pretty unique in that regard. And with him, the original 3 Straw Hats would finally be playable. And speaking of characters finally playable, the next Capcom character would be John Talbane. Oh, poor John. Like every Darkstalker character, he has a really cool concept. He's a werewolf that practices the martial arts to keep his mind sane and prevent his primal instincts from harming innocent people. That's a hell of a motivation right there. And he's one of the few outright heroes of the series for that reason. But unfortunately, he's also a very straightforward martial artist owned by the company that brought Ryu into the world. In the context of a crossover, you're never winning that battle. That in turn makes the more distinct Darkstalker characters stand out even more. Felicia has a similar gimmick with a more distinct fighting style, Morgan is the fan-preferred mascot, and there is no shortage of other options from that series. But much like with Zoro, he benefits from the fact that, by this point, there haven't been any standard martial artists added to this proposed sequel, so he would actually be a breath of fresh air. With his home series giving him a full moveset to pull from, there's not much needed to make him work in a 2v2 fighter. His costumes were a bit of a holdup though, mostly because Dark Talbane is just a palette swap, so that would work better as a color variation than a reference costume. So instead, I would say his reference costume should be him getting the color scheme and extra items of Amaterasu from Okami. And for his crossover cosplay, he would be transformed into a bipedal version of the nine-tailed fox from Naruto, even replacing his howling with wrathful roars of the demon fox. And while we're not going to Naruto with this next one, it is time to get back to Shonen Jump. And you know what? I'm gonna go with Rukia. As I referenced earlier, she was originally going to be the Bleach representative, specifically along the lines of Yoran Tatsumaki of representing a series that she's not the main protagonist of, and to get more female fighters in the roster. It's merely that Ichigo had a unique chance to bring Soki's moveset back in. Had it been Rukia, the DLC slot might have gone to Shigaraki or Himiko instead, which in turn would have dropped Todoroki and may have given Ace or Mizore a chance. Maybe Rukia actually blocked the most characters from getting in. Regardless, her moveset would also have a strong distinguishing factor of being able to effortlessly swap between her sword and using magic spells for attacks, while not stepping on the toes of other magic characters like Trucy or the Dark Magician. She also would not have to be a proper stance fighter to achieve this either. Her initial design would be the default, and her time skip design would be the franchise reference. And for her crossover cosplay, I would go with Akane from Onimusha. Honestly, of all the characters I wish I added to the roster, Akane is very high up there. And in general, I feel bad that I didn't give Onimusha a rep. But there's no one on the Capcom side I'm willing to drop for her. And that includes the final option, Chuck Green. It's probably not a surprise that my favorite Capcom game has my favorite Capcom character, but I just really like Chuck as a character. This is in part to his unique characterization as a sad dad story. You see, possibly because Dead Rising 2 predates The Last of Us, he gets to have that sad dad story that's not defined by that sadness or remorse the way characters like Joel or modern-day Kratos are. If anything, Chuck is known for being as stoic as a brick wall towards anything that's not a cute red-haired woman. And he has a strange mixture of lame one-liners and really dark humor that results in what can only be described as gallows dad jokes. Kinda makes me wonder if Chuck Green is the kind of man Leon sees himself as in the original RE4. On the gameplay side of things, if Frank covers the level-up system and Nick gets combo weapons, Chuck's unique gameplay gimmick would be books. Or magazines in his case. The idea is that Chuck has some moves that are always used, like his combo weapons, while certain moves are buffed or replaced if he has certain magazines active. For example, He can hold hand-to-hand magazine for his barehanded and skill moves to do more damage and have access to more of them, pull out a combat magazine to buff any base weapons that would be affected by it, or he could equip the bartending magazine to make the buffs from his mixed drinks last longer. Oh right, he'd be able to use mixed drinks to get the effects of them for a short time, although none of them would immediately recover health. Spitfire would make his projectile a really fast fireball attack, Nectar would summon queens that sting opponents during his combos, Regen from Dead Rising 3 would, well, regenerate his health, and Quickstep would, well, speed him up. His Dead Rising 2 outfit would be his default. His Dead Rising 3 attire could instead just be referenced with a black version of his normal clothes, so instead his franchise reference outfit will be the Terra is Reality costume, and for his crossover cosplay, he'd be dressing up as Lloyd Forger from Spy X Family. From both being fathers on the stoic side, to their blonde hair, to the Dead Rising series having suits as costumes, to this specific suit being green, there's a lot of little things that make this work for Chuck. So if Chuck is my favorite Capcom character, that would mean that up next is my favorite Shonen Jump character, right? Well, not quite. Now, here's the thing. We're going to Naruto on this one, which is my favorite Shonen Jump series, and I originally considered going with Kakashi, my favorite main character from Shonen Jump, or Hinata, who might be my favorite secondary Shonen Jump character. Instead, I'm going with Sakura Haruno. Why? Well, she's not my favorite Naruto character, probably not even top 10 if I'm being honest, but she's easily the most overhated. And make no mistake, I have my issues with how her story arc is handled, but people acting like she's completely useless because she didn't defeat any main villains, but then propping up Rock Lee, a character who's more of a jobber than Yamcha, is infuriating. Look, I could easily go down this road and just let 10 years of salt pour out over the course of, 10 minutes? But let's cut to the chase. I find that Sakura follows the most important of Pixar's 22 rules of storytelling, the same rule that Rock Lee and Naruto follow, but Sasuke ultimately doesn't. You admire a character more for their efforts than their successes. Sakura will never be as powerful as, let's say, Sasuke, but Sakura also doesn't get the sad boy eye powers or an overpowered older brother to carry her through the series. If Chuck Green is the character I add out of favoritism, Sakura is the character I add out of spite. However, Sakura does have some really good gameplay contributions. She would be based loosely on her appearance in Clash of Ninja Revolution 3, where she was more of a heavy-hitting brawler, but this time with an emphasis on command grabs. Think of an in-between of Alex and Makoto from Street Fighter 3, a slow fighter with attacks that can come out really fast, and a surprising amount of command grabs, including one in the air that can force the opponent back down to the ground. Speaking of which, she could disrupt the ground to force the opponent back into the air if she wants, and would be allowed to place paper bombs down as a mine. She could also throw shuriken as weak but wide-covering projectiles, in case an opponent manages to find her blind spot. However, her big tech options would be hand signs. Once Sakura enters the stance, and if you can enter the input fast enough, Sakura can activate one of 3 ninjutsu, all of which will cost 1 hype meter. There's the combat ninjutsu. This will make her glow a bright pink. Her attacks hit harder and come out much faster, especially the slower strong attacks. This is meant to emphasize the Makoto inspirations of her in this game. On the flip side, there's chakra concentration, which would make Sakura glow a bright blue. She gains hype faster from all sources, minus Baroque of course, and her command grabs hit harder. This is meant to emphasize the Alex inspirations. And finally, there's the medical counter jutsu. Sakura will glow a bright green for this one. All negative status effects are removed, she becomes immune to any future ones for a few seconds, and her natural health regeneration is buffed. Oh yeah, Sakura would have health regeneration. Though in the context of how important red health is to this game, that's arguably just as much of a downside as it is an upside. Since these are not proper hyper combos, these cannot be sealed or blocked, but she can normally only have 1 active at a time. Aside from her final technique, Tsunade's Vitality Regeneration. Remember, she has the purple diamond on her forehead by the end of the series. It takes 3 hype meters and it can only be done once per fight, but Sakura will get all 3 ninjutsus activated at the same time for 20 seconds, glowing bright yellow for as long as it lasts. And because I'm not done throwing twists and turns at this point, her default costume would be the Chunin combat armor she wore during the 4th Great Ninja War. Given that Sakura largely shows off the broader aspects of the series that the previous 3 characters don't have room for in their toolkits, the standard military uniform just seemed appropriate. Plus, you can have the palette swaps reference the uniforms of different ninja nations. Her traditional outfit from Shippuden would be the franchise reference costume. There are plenty of options to reference other characters through the color swaps, like Ino, Tenten, Shinzune, so on and so forth. And finally, she would dress up as Sakura from Street Fighter with her crossover cosplay. Oh hey, Sakura from Street Fighter could also dress up as Naruto Sakura. See? I told you I'd be able to figure out a cosplay for Sakura before the video was over. Alright, the roster is truly finished. No more jokes, no more twists and turns. Let's take a moment to recap what this absolute insanity would look like if it ever came to fruition. The first game's roster would feature Ryu, Goku, Chun-Li, Krillin, Juri, Frieza, Rashid, Beerus, Mega Man, Izuku, Zero, Bakugo, Tronbon, Tanjiro, Leon, Nezuko, Nemesis, Luffy, Frank West, Nami, Batsu, Naruto, Mike Hager, Sasuke, Dante, Tobi, Nero, Ichigo, Asura, Tatsumaki, Felicia, Yor, Morgan, Bobobo, Jetadoma, Dio, and as bonus characters, Sakura Kazugano and Vegeta the Hedgehog. The first set of extra characters, either added through extra development or a season of DLC, would be Dudley, Omega Shenron, Ruby Heart, the Dark Magician, Edward Falcon, and Edward Elric. The next tier would consist of what would certainly be DLC in the form of the Monster Huntress, Grimjaw, Arthur, Captain Buggy, Roll, and Hisoka. For a sequel title that literally builds upon the original, it would add Jamie, Android 21, Beautiful Joe, Jotaro, Lady, Yukihira, Nick Ramos, Kuro Sensei, Jill Valentine, Senku, Firebrand, and Todoroki. And for the sequel's sole wave of DLC, it would add Trucy Wright, Zoro, John Talbane, Rukia, Chuck Green, and Sakura Haruno. Now, if I were to bring back the kaijus from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, the PTX from Lost Planet would return in the base roster, and the Shonen Jump kaiju would have been the Blue Eyes White Dragon. However, these were cut before the roster was even close to being finalized, so no kaijus were ever considered for DLC or the sequel. Speaking of cut characters though, there were a lot of them when it came to this video. So to end this video off, let's go over the many honorable mentions that got cut out through the process of making the roster this video just displayed. Starting off with Dragon Ball, Majin Buu was the first character cut from the roster. He was back when Dragon Ball and Street Fighter both had 6 characters each in the roster. In Dragon Ball's case, it was going to have 3 heroes and 3 villains. Android 18 was going to be a separate character from Krillin, and in one incarnation even replaced him. But for the most part, the idea at this point in the roster was that Dragon Ball would have 2 heroes, 2 villains, and 2 redeemed characters. The latter would be Vegeta and Android 18. The final cut Dragon Ball characters were Perfect Cell and Cooler, as I brought up earlier. Street Fighter had what might have been the deepest cut of any of the cut characters, as Rainbow Mika was originally going to be the Street Fighter Alpha representative. She also would have added an additional grappler. On that note, Akuma was in the roster and got dropped, but not for the sake of Dark Sakura. At least not entirely. It was the desire to have Asura in the roster that put the nail in his coffin. M. Bison was considered to be a representative of not any version of Street Fighter, but the villains of the series. This angle was eventually dropped, although he stayed in the roster longer than Akuma did. It wasn't until the Street Fighter roster was being based on the individual generations that he finally got the boot. Back when there was going to be a proper story mode, there would be 2 fusion characters. Ryu and Goku would fuse together to make Ryoku, and M. Bison would fuse with Perfect Cell to make MP Bicell. I was kinda just having fun with the name on that one. Kakashi was literally the last character cut from the roster, as in, he was in the roster when I initially started scripting this video. The idea is that he would use copy jutsu to copy level 1 hyper combos. This is why Sakura was the last character. Kakashi would wait until there was no one left to add. His reference outfit would have been his Anbu attire, and his crossover cosplay was going to be Hunk. But on top of wanting to add Sakura out of, well, spite, I also then realized 3 of the 4 Naruto characters were using the Sharingan, and that kind of angered me on some level. Hinata was in the very first finished version of this roster as a DLC edition, but this was also back when there were only 4 Shonen Jump IPs in the roster. Her exclusion hurts me the most, if I'm being honest. Sigma was going to be playable, but I eventually decided to only have 1 character from each Mega Man series in the base roster, And for the base game DLC, I wanted the Monster Huntress to be the infinite representative. Base.exe and Roll.exe were both considered as Battle Network representatives. Ultimately, I needed to start trimming the fat. My hero had several characters cut for simple reasons. Ochako was dropped in favor of Tatsumaki, and Himiko was dropped for Yor. All Might eventually got dummied out. Characters considered but never made it into a version of the roster included Ida, Momo, Sue, Shigaraki, and Dabi. Strangely enough, never All for One though. Albert Wesker was going to return, but Nemesis ended up taking his slot as a much-needed heavyweight fighter. Sanji was in my very first incarnation of the roster, and was dropped not long after Majin Buu. To reiterate from earlier, Boa Hancock was dropped in favor of Nami at a friend's request. And as I alluded to earlier, Ace lost his spot to Todoroki. Rouge was going to be a Power Stone representative alongside Edward at one point in the roster. Jack the Mad Clown was also considered. I have two characters labeled Scar and Ling. I don't remember what series they were supposed to be from, and I can't figure out where they got dummied out either. Saki was going to be the Tatsunoko vs. Capcom carryover for the B tier before that went to Roll. Mizori from Rosario the Vampire was another Todoroki victim. Many obscure Capcom characters were considered, but dropped to save them for future Versus video ideas. The deepest cut of them all was a female wrestler named Black Widow. Finally, Rama 1/2 was going to be in by some means until I realized that wasn't a Shonen Jump property. That was the single most reoccurring problem with making this roster, I assure you. With all that done, I'd like to thank you all for watching this passion project of mine. I've never made a video like this before, and I've wanted to give it a try when I finally had a surplus of time. If you enjoyed this video, which has been like a year in the making, please like, comment, and share the video. The algorithm seems to change every few months, but that seems to consistently work. Let me know if you want me to try my hand at any more roster videos like this.